Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack.
And Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about stuff. This week on the show, we are doing another Gundam episode for you with our sister podcast, Weekly Suit Gundam, where we are talking about the first Gundam series to make it big in the West, here in America. Some new weekly report Gundam, new Mobile Report Gundam Wing, also known as Mobile Suit Gundam Wing, better known as just Gundam Wing.
That's what everybody calls it.
Yeah. It's got a lot of titles. I like its Japanese title. It's cool. But anyway, we are talking about Gundam Wing, which you might have seen on Cartoon Network's Toonami block as a kid. We are talking all about that, plus its OVA/movie sequel, Endless Waltz. So you will hear that discussion later, again, from our sister podcast, Weekly Suit Gundam. But we're also just going to talk about a little bit of stuff here at the top of the show, give you non-Gundam fans something else. I mean, you should be a Gundam fan. Everyone should be.
Yes.
You know, someone asked us on Twitter the other day for anime recommendations, and I just linked Weekly Suit Gundam because it's a long running series now of anime recommendations.
And yes, and you know, it's a good place to start. If you want to go back, watch some 70-ass anime, you can do that, or you can watch modern anime. Gundam is eternal and it is ever giving.
Indeed. So Gundam Wing, I think, is a big one for us to talk about, and we're excited to do that. So you will hear that later on. But Sean, what is going on in the world of stuff for you? I don't know if we have any Plague Cast updates.
Yeah, no, nothing really new on the Plague Cast front. It's just another week. I realized that next week is the last week of April, which is weird because that means we're almost in May.
It's scary.
And that's like... My frame of reference for time for the, where we are in the school semester is so fucked right now. Because normally, by now, we would have already had PSAT testing and we would have had prom. Which are two, really notable landmarks in the spring semester. And they just aren't there. And so I feel like it doesn't feel like I'm entering the last 3 weeks of the spring semester, but I actually am, and it is stressing me the fuck out every time I think about it.
You guys didn't do a virtual prom where everyone was on Zoom dancing sadly in their basement?
We didn't do that. We did there was a school spirit week thing that they tried to do digitally with social media, but no, it was not. We didn't go the full 9 yards.
Okay, good, because that would have been just sad. You would have had 5 kids show up.
Yeah, it was a lot of today's take a picture of you with your pet and send it into the school Twitter account or whatever it was, or I think we used Instagram.
Okay, nice. Something the kids don't actually use because you're not doing TikTok. Yeah.
Well, we can't use TikTok because that's for perverts.
You heard your first folks. TikTok's for perverts, Sean Chapman.
It's just true. If you have no exposure to the world of TikTok, congratulations.
I see the ones that get big on Twitter, so the giant viral hits, and that's it. So I have no sense of what's under that topmost layer.
It's perversions.
Okay,
mostly.
Now we sound like old men. So
it's just true.
No, it's fine.
Just true.
It's fine.
Bring back Vine. Vine was better.
I have decided I hate Zoom. I hate it with a passion. My goal in life now is when this is all over, I just want to make enough money in the world that I can buy Zoom and liquidate it. And so it no longer exists.
Or, I mean, if you want to get rid of it, you can just buy it and then rename it Zune, the Microsoft Zune.
That'd be great.
Just ensure that it gets, just tanked immediately.
Yeah, for some reason, the first, I think with I hadn't even heard of Zoom until all this happened, and then we started using it. No. Because it's not a very good program, but it's the best we have for this. Because Google Hangouts is built more for one-on-one, not meeting settings.
Yeah.
And so, but because of that, I keep accidentally saying Zune, and I think it's the first time I've thought of Zune since high school.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is what I had. My parents were too cheap to give me an iPod, so I had a Zune.
I remember that. Yeah. It was funny.
It was sad. It's real sad. It had. What was the game that the 360 launched with? Hexel? It was
Hexen? No, Hexen's a shooter. Hexic
HD. That was the one thing I liked about my Zune. Hexic's actually an okay puzzle game. It's not great, but it's playable on the Xbox One. I still have it, I think.
I remember using the Zune computer software because it digitally linked up nicely with the Xbox 360, so I could play music that way. And then eventually that became such a hassle. I'm like, fuck it, I'm just going to use headphones and my iPod because it sucks.
Yeah. What else can we talk about, Sean, to make us sound fucking old? let's see.
We'll talk. I mean, we're going to talk about Toonami.
Yeah, we're going to talk about
the
Toonami.
Gundam Wing section.
Yeah.
That's going to make me feel very old.
Do you want me to tell you now that so we're heading into May, which means I gotta get to work writing my final papers for the semester.
Yeah.
Would you like me to tell you the topic of one of them?
Sure.
Okay. For one of my classes, I'm writing a paper called "Who's Your Space Daddy?"
Okay.
Which came from a conversation we had in a class where I forget exactly how it was. Like this is basically the thesis of the paper is I'm looking at the Star Wars sequel trilogy as an example of what has been termed by some academics the legacy sequel, which is this era of the 2010 sequel where it's like it's not just a sequel, it's like it's the characters in the universe are, aged the same way we are, and nostalgia is the name of the game, and it's going out and discovering things that they discovered the first time, but with a new group of characters, So
Yes.
very much like The Force Awakens, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm writing about the Star Wars sequel trilogy as an example of the way people there's a little bit of a psychoanalytic component to this, that I'm, as always when I use psychoanalysis, I'm kind of doing it with a little wink and a nudge.
Yeah.
That, people, my main thesis is that in Star Wars 1977, Luke gets to go have an unknown adventure.
He gets to have his own adventure for himself as a character.
And for the audience there, they didn't know what a Star Wars was.
Yes.
Right? So he goes out and has, and that's what most movies are. Like you go see Raiders of the Lost Ark, you don't know what kind of adventure Indiana Jones is going to have, right?
Yeah.
But we don't get that much anymore because Rey Skywalker, I guess we call her now, she
never filed the papers. She's Rey Palpatine. We all know it. She never went through the proper channels to make that name change, and it is scandalous that she would claim the Skywalker name.
Yes.
That's my position.
So Rey Skywalker, she doesn't get to have an unknown adventure. She gets to have a Star Wars adventure, right? And it's coded as, and she even in the universe is like, I want to go have a Star Wars adventure. And I think the Star Wars Legacy sequels are the most blatant example of all this because literally at some point in the trilogy, she gets to claim every Legacy character as a parental figure in one form or another. Uh-huh. They are her space daddies and her space mommies. This is what I said in discussion jokingly. And then someone said, you need to write a paper called Who's Your Space Daddy? And I said, challenge accepted, and I'm doing that. But anyway, because my joke was that Luke Skywalker tries to be, a disciplined space daddy who takes the toys away and doesn't let you play with all of them and tries to share the toys. But then he learns to be a good space daddy in the last movie and gives you the toy back and says it's the most important thing in the world. And my starting point, Sean, is actually a discussion we had. I actually re-listened to our Rise of Skywalker podcast for inspiration because you had a great point about... Rey kills the Emperor in anger. The Emperor says, strike me down in hatred, and where Luke said no, Rey gets 2 lightsabers instead of 1 and just fucking kills him.
Yeah.
And that's like literally how my paper is going to start. And the whole joke being, I'm going to start with the scene in Return of the Jedi where like Luke, breaking a long lineage of the Jedi being hypocrites, tosses down his lightsaber and through this kind of radical act of pacifism saves the day. Cut 30 years later, Rey gets 2 lightsabers instead of 1 and murders the dude.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the starting point because it's where everything else comes out of. So you can tell it's a little, I've got to arrange it a little bit. But mostly I just want to make fun of the Star Wars sequels in an academic setting.
Yeah. I mean, but it's very true. It's very true about a lot of the media we make today. And it's stuff that we talked about on the Star Wars podcast. And it's annoying because I tend to like stuff that exists like kind of on its own terms and for its own self, rather than something that exists like in subjugation to some other sort of media or media franchise because it is so beholden to it that it sort of compromises its own vision. It makes me think a lot of that. I don't know if we ever actually talked about it on the podcast, the trailer for the Ghostbusters movie.
It's part of the paper, yeah.
Yeah, good. Yeah, because it's like even though that movie itself is not out, that trailer is more than enough of an indication of this is the apotheosis of this concept of where the original movie has been enshrined in gold and must be worshipped at the altar.
I mean, because this is my kind of overall thesis, why it's called the Space Daddies joke, is that it's literally making our pop culture icons into our parents and allowing us to vicariously live through them like the bodies of their children as though we now get to be their kids. And that's literally the premise of Ghostbusters Afterlife, is these kids find out they are Egon Spengler's grandchildren. And that's so fucking pathetic. I can't even... And of course that one also, and this is going to be part of the paper too, is it exists in context with the Ghostbusters 2016 movie,
which does not try to do that.
No, it's got references and stuff, but it's really just trying to do a new Ghostbusters movie without in that continuity. That's not a perfect movie or anything, but I like that premise a lot more than nostalgia wins the day always, and it's the most important thing. And so Star Wars will be the bulk of the paper, but I'm going to talk about that. I'm also going to talk about probably some like counter examples. Like I think Blade Runner 2049 I think is a pretty good counter example to this, in that it kind of sets it up that way. But kind of the premise of that movie is that the Ryan Gosling character finds out he's not actually, Harrison Ford's kid, and there's this kind of fraught relationship there. So anyway, so that's what I'm working on. What have you been up to, Sean, in terms of stuff?
It's mostly just been, I was wrapping up Gundam Wing, and watching Endless Waltz, and then I've just been pounding away at Yakuza 5. So I finished the Saejima section. So it feels like basically how this podcast is going to go for the next 2 or 3 weeks, I guess, is each time we've recorded this podcast almost right after I've finished one of the protagonist sections of Yakuza 5. So the Saejima stuff, which is pretty cool. It's not as good as Kiryu's section at the beginning of the game, because they kind of repeat a little bit too much, I think, of Saijima's stuff from Yakuza 4, because his role in Yakuza 4 was he was in prison for like 15 years after this big Yakuza hit he pulls, and then he breaks out of prison and gets involved into the main plot of Yakuza 4. And then Yakuza 5, he starts off in this place of, he's kind of next in line to be captain of the Tojo family, which is like one of the highest ranks you can be. So he's going to be a major player in the Tojo family. But before he can do that, he has to go back to jail to kind of like finish out his sentence and kind of go clean a little bit so he can kind of come back into the clan, which means that the opening bits of Saejima is him in prison again. And I think it does a little bit too much of the same stuff that it does in Yakuza 4. But after he breaks out of prison, you have a long section where you are just in the mountains of Hokkaido, because you're in Hokkaido. The prison he's in is in Hokkaido. And you're in the snowy mountains of Hokkaido. You escape the prison. There's like a fucking snowmobile chase like you're playing fucking Modern Warfare 2. And you're escaping the prison. You crash in the middle of the night, and then you get attacked by a giant bear called Yama Orochi. And you fight, and you get in a fist fight with this giant bear. By giant bear, I mean it's like 2 times the size of a normal bear. This massive bear. And then eventually you get saved by a matagi, which is a like traditional Hokkaidan Japanese hunter that live up in the mountains. And you have then, instead of the taxi missions that Kiryu have, each protagonist basically has their own long sequence of side missions that is based around a specific kind of minigame or mechanic. So for Kiryu, it was taxi driving. For Saejima, it's going on these hunting missions in the mountains, and it becomes like, it reminded me a lot of Red Dead Redemption 2. Obviously not, like, there's not that nearly that amount of detail, but the feel of trekking through the snow and planting your feet and like taking a shot and, trying to hunt a deer. And so you just have a long series of missions while you help this old hunter who's kind of down on his luck, is being shunned by the hunting village he lives in, who is obsessed in a very Captain Ahab-like way with Yama Orochi, this giant bear that killed his hunting partner 10 years ago. You help him sort of like reclaim his sense of what it means to be a hunter and hunt Yama Orochi, and that shit is very good.
Games are crazy.
It's crazy. Yeah, the moment where you start fist fighting a bear, it's pretty fucking good. It's pretty fucking good.
I've always wanted to fist fight a bear in a video game.
Yes.
So there we go. Now I know what game it is. It's Yakuza 5. Mm-hmm. I have been continuing my trek through. It was a lot of early 2000s Capcom games. Then I followed the people who left Capcom, and now I'm playing a lot of Platinum Games.
Yep.
And Platinum Games makes really good games. So last week I talked about playing Vanquish. I think I went home and finished that right after last week's podcast. And then I immediately jumped into another run through Vanquish on hard mode. And that game is just so great. I did wind up abandoning my hard run playthrough for now because I was doing it to get some of the achievements in part. And the achievement for the third hard mode act didn't pop. I was really sad. And then I was doing other stuff.
Yeah.
But Vanquish, as I said last week, I think I said all I need to say about it. It's a phenomenal fucking game. It's short. It's like 6 to 8 hours. And you can make it much faster if you're like skipping the cutscenes and stuff on a second playthrough. And it does leave the sense that like this was clearly supposed to be a franchise, and you really wish there was like more of it so they could like fully continue to explore everything they introduced in that one.
Yeah.
It kind of like the game itself doesn't feel unfinished. It's very polished. It's really well done. It's got a great arc. It's well paced, all that. But it's one of those games that you play and you're like, God damn it, why didn't this get a sequel? It's kind of like, I'll put that up on the shelf next to Sleeping Dogs of like great unfinished franchises that we'll never get more of because they flopped, but they were better than all of their competition.
Yes, yeah.
So, if you haven't played Sleeping Dogs, go play Sleeping Dogs.
It's very good. The PS4, Xbox One version is very good.
Yeah, and it's usually on sale for like $5, if that. And yeah, so go get that. Anyway, I also feel like that, I know this probably isn't true, I feel like that's been an Xbox Live Games with Gold and PS Plus game like 7 different times.
I'm pretty sure I own it on PS4 because it was a PS Plus game at one point.
Yeah. I know they don't usually repeat those, but I just feel, maybe it's just because it's so often one of those games that's on sale because the people who made it don't exist anymore. Or the studio, I mean. Not that the people are alive and well.
Yeah.
But anyway, getting off track. Vanquish is great. Then I jumped into another Platinum Games game from that era, the one that actually was packaged with it in the remaster earlier this year, Bayonetta. I have never played Bayonetta, despite it now being kind of one of the new, like, not marquee maybe, but Nintendo franchises, because Nintendo owns the sequels at least, and it's in Smash Bros. And all that. And so I have it on Switch. I had bought the Bayonetta 2, Bayonetta 1 pack when it came out on Switch, but I had not played through them yet. So now I'm playing through Bayonetta 1 on Switch. The Switch version is fine. It's the most solid console version there had been until the remaster they did earlier this year, which is where you want to play it if you want to play it in like 4K. Obviously, the Switch can't do that. Otherwise, it's perfect. And Bayonetta is a really fucking good game, Sean.
Yep.
As everyone has ever said. Have you played Bayonetta? I forget.
I played through the first few levels because I had it on PS3 when we were in the condo because I'm pretty sure it was a PS Plus game. So I just had it.
Yeah.
And so I played through some of the beginning of it, but I think that was around the time the PS4 was just coming out. So I ended up dropping off of it because it moved on to other stuff.
Well, you should absolutely play Bayonetta because it's fucking great. It is loopy, it is crazy, and it is definitely now in the running for my favorite cutscenes in any video game ever. And I'd have to think about my list of that, of like what games I like that have the best cutscenes. But like Bayonetta's cutscenes are just like, they're great little anime shorts, basically. I mean, not animated, they're in-engine stuff, but they're like really crazy anime bullshit. It's wild. I tweeted out a couple of videos the other day, like the one where she shoots a cherub statue in the dick and makes it explode, and it's wild. And you know what I'm talking about if you've played Bayonetta, and if you haven't, you're probably very confused. But Bayonetta is, an action game. It's definitely in the vein, as I understand it, of Devil May Cry, but I don't know, on fucking coke.
Yeah, I mean it's a character action game. Like
yes.
It is. Yeah, it is very much like Devil May Cry, Ninja Gaiden. It is in that.
Yeah.
Design philosophy.
Because Hideki Kamiya made Devil May Cry 1,
yeah.
Then he did not work on any of the sequels, to my understanding. So Bayonetta is kind of like his big follow-up to that. And oh my god, I mean, the game's personality is probably best defined by the opening credits run over. It's the names of some of the staff members in a graveyard on tombstones, and it gets to Hideki Kamiya. It says Game Director Hideki Kamiya, and then someone starts pissing on it, and it's one of the characters, and that's how the game opens, is with Hideki Kamiya getting his name pissed on. And that's kind of like, the game has this, very much feels like a precursor to Doom 2016, in that it is like this heathen kind of like rebel game that's like, literally you're fighting all the gods and angels and taking them down. I mean, in Doom it's the demons, I guess, but it's like Bayonetta is, you're taking on higher powers and ripping them to shreds without any thought about it.
Yeah.
It's wonderful in that way. And it is, I have not played a ton of character action games like this. I've never played Devil May Cry, and this one definitely has quite a long onboarding. Like, I'm near the end of the game. I'm on like chapter 11, and there's like 16 chapters, so I'm getting close. And I'm still learning things about it. It really feels like a game where your first playthrough is your kind of onboarding, and then you go back. Yeah. And it's incredibly fun. It's very hard at times because, like, there's so many tools. Like, it's a very simple control scheme, but there's so many things you can do within it. It very much defines that kind of easy to learn, hard to master sort of thing, because it also has, like, fighting game elements and all the fucking combos you can do, which those are in Devil May Cry, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of interesting. So Bayonetta was Platinum Games. It wasn't their first ever game, but it was, I feel like, their first one that kind of made an impression. And it definitely feels that, as weird a comparison as this is, the combat system is definitely a precursor to Nier Automata, because Bayonetta has a gun that you can shoot just constantly while doing everything else, and then a light and a heavy attack, and then kind of combos within that. And Nier's is more sober, which Nier is not a sober game, but compared to Bayonetta.
Yeah, its focus is not on this incredibly elaborate combat system.
Yes.
It is very much a pared down version of what you'd get in a combat or a character action game.
But it actually made me, like, having played Nier helped me understand Bayonetta, and now playing Bayonetta, I think if I went back to Nier, I'd be better at it because I get some of what they're going for there. So it's really interesting. And then you have all the different weapons and crazy shit, and I'm just starting to learn how to use all of those. But Bayonetta is really the complete package of a game because the combat is ludicrously fun and deep and challenging, and then all of the character stuff and the cutscenes and the story is deliriously silly and wonderful, and I love it to death, and I will probably go right into Bayonetta 2 when I'm done with this, but it's a lot of fun, and I see why people love this game now. And luckily it's easily accessible now because they have the remaster is out there. It also was a 360 backwards compatible title, and I know this because I was looking through my library the other day and Bayonetta was in there. I'm like, I never bought Bayonetta on 360, and I think it was a Games with Gold at one point.
Probably.
So I have that, and maybe I should just like boot that up at some point and see what it's like, how it compares, like playing it on a modern Xbox. But I know, like, I was watching one of the Digital Foundry videos about it, and that had been like the console kind of. If you played that version on the Xbox One X, you could get it to like 60 FPS, like really smooth throughout. And then now they have the 4K remaster that's out there that's just rock solid. But anyway, so it's easy to play. Weirdly, again, because of the whole Nintendo deal, you can play Bayonetta 1 on anything, and Bayonetta 2 on exactly two systems, the Wii U and the Nintendo Switch. So, and then Bayonetta 3 will be on one, I assume, than the Nintendo Switch. So if it ever...
Yeah, eventually we'll hear something more about Bayonetta 3. They have not said anything about that game since, like, the original teaser trailer.
Yeah, I mean, they have consistently said they're working on it. Like, they haven't, like, gone radio silent and, like, left us all to speculate. They have said, like... It's in production. It's going smoothly. But I don't know. Platinum has like a weird like juggling act going on, and Hideki Kamiya's game was Scalebound, and then that got canceled. So now he's directing a new game. But Bayonetta was his thing, but he's more of a producer on it. So we don't even know which team is doing Bayonetta because the Nier Automata team did Astral Chain. The Scalebound team is doing what's called Project GG now, but we don't know what that's going to be. So I don't know if they have a third team doing Bayonetta. It's very weird.
Because Platinum puts out like such a wide range of different titles. They put out like really small licensed things. They put out big games that take multiple years. Platinum is a very cool but very eclectic studio that does. They're not like a Bethesda or someone like that where you know exactly what their output is. Platinum, I feel like you're just like, I don't know. They seem like they're working on like 20 games right now. I have no idea.
Yeah, but for their main games, I've loved every one I've ever played, and I'm definitely on the path to playing all their major titles. Like, if you cut out all the weird little license things, what I have left is Bayonetta 2, Wonderful 101, and Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. Yeah. So, and I want to play all of those at some point. So anyway, that's what I've been working on. Bayonetta's crazy, but it's a good game. And now I play her in Smash, and I'm like, I get all of this. There we go.
Cool. So. I remembered something else I did, just like as a shout out. If you have a PS4, they're doing the Big in Japan sale. So basically every time around Golden Week, next week is Golden Week in Japan, they have a big Japanese game sale. And I did pick up a couple of things, notably everything except for the Resident Evil 3 remake for the Resident Evil franchise is on sale with like pretty deep sales. So I did pick up the PS4 version of Resident Evil 4. So I think that's the third copy of Resident Evil 4 I now own. So that's nice. I got that. I also got, if you want to get the PS4 version of Final Fantasy VII, it is the original version of Final Fantasy VII, and play it ahead of the remake. That's 50% off, so I also picked up that. And I was staring at, and I'm still contemplating, even though I have no interest playing these games, but it's such an absurdly good deal. If you have any interest in playing Kingdom Hearts, the Kingdom Hearts all-in-one package that is normally $100 and has like the updated versions of Kingdom Hearts 1, 2, Chain of Memories, 358 over 2 days, Dream Drop Distance, basically any Kingdom Hearts game. It's
literally a version of every game they've put out.
Yeah, and any game that it can't be put out because it's like a weird web browser game or some shit has like a movie version that tells you the events of it. And this includes Kingdom Hearts 3, but I don't think it includes the DLC they just put out. So it's basically everything other than that DLC. Normally that retails for $100. It's $30. Yeah. And it's such a good fucking deal. I have no interest in playing Kingdom Hearts, but I cannot stop thinking about it. It's killing me.
It's been discounted a couple times, and I've thought the same thing. Those are all out on Xbox now, and 3 is in Game Pass, so I'm thinking those will all be in Game Pass at some point. So I might just like not, because I don't really want to play them either. So I might just wait on that. But yeah, it's Kingdom Hearts, I mean, I like that I think it's really cool, the initiative to like put them all out in one package.
Because there was a long period of time where if you were a Kingdom Hearts fan, you had to own every system on the fucking planet to be able to play those games.
Yeah, including a Japanese cell phone.
Yes.
Which is weird, yeah. So Sean, next week we'll hear you talk all about Kingdom Hearts.
I have not bought it.
Okay.
I did not pull the trigger on that one.
Can I say one other thing I've been playing that I wanted to mention?
Yeah, go ahead.
I've been playing a ton the last few weeks of Call of Duty Warzone, and I haven't mentioned it at all. Have you touched it?
I still haven't checked it out, no.
It's so good. Typically, my brother and I play it when he's free over in Japan. It's the thing we've been playing online, and it's the Call of Duty Battle Royale mode, and I really love it. It's the first Battle Royale game I've really gotten into. And because it's one of the first ones that's like I feel super easily accessible to like play with a friend because it's all cross-play, it's on all the systems, it's Call of Duty, so like they have a good network infrastructure and all that, you know. So
and you understand how it plays because it's just Call of Duty.
Yeah, that's a huge thing about it. Like Modern Warfare has some ticks to it that I had to learn, but it's like very accessible. It started out as a 3-person squad battle royale, but they've added 4-person squads, solos. You can kind of play it however you want, which is neat. It's just really good. The map is really cool. It's giant. I'm still finding new places in it. You know, I think with any battle royale game, you wish there was more, but like the one map has to be so big, you understand why they don't have 5 maps or something. It definitely, you can tell this one is helped by being part of Modern Warfare because it has all the guns and it has all they've just taken all those assets and put them into this, so it's very robust. Like it feels more to me like a fully fleshed out thing than like Apex Legends did at launch for me. And again, that bonus of I know how to play it because it's Call of Duty.
Yeah.
You know, it's the first Call of Duty multiplayer experience where you don't die immediately when getting shot, because if they did that, it would be a very bad battle royale.
Yes.
So they bulked up that. There's a whole armor system. But it's really cool. There's also a mode called Plunder, because a big part of it, like with any battle royale game, is you go around doing missions and like getting money and stuff. So there's a mode where you can respawn and it's just going and getting money, and like whoever gets the most money wins. And that's a really fun mode to play. My brother and I, we have not won any of these modes, but you know, the mark of any battle royale game is that you have fun even if you're not winning, right? Because mostly you're not going to win. There's in this one, there's 150 people on the map, so it's quite a big one. But it's goofy, it's great. I think it has some cool stuff. Like if you die, it's not necessarily the end of the world, because you get sent to the gulag. And then you have these like cage match fights with someone, and if you win, you get to redeploy. And if you lose, if your squad is still up, if they raise enough money, they can call you back in. So that's really cool, adds to the strategy. And then this weekend, they were having a free multiplayer weekend, and because Warzone just downloads all of Modern Warfare for you, they don't make a different client. Like the client says something different, but it's the full download. So that they can do things like this, where there's a free multiplayer weekend, and without downloading anything else, they were letting you play some of the Modern Warfare multiplayer mode. Fuck, that's good.
It's very good, huh?
I'm gonna have to buy that fucking game now. It's good shit.
It's a good game. Yeah, like the campaign in terms of its game design is very good. If you just like want to skip the cutscenes and not think about the politics of it too much, it is a very, very fun game to play.
Yeah, I totally want to play it now more. Just that multiplayer, I was like, this is kind of like how I remember Call of Duty being, but I know it's better than it actually was.
Yeah, you know? Yeah, it has like the pacing of it is much more like the original Modern Warfare than a lot of the games they made in between.
Yeah. And like I was surprised that after it took me a couple matches to like get back into it, because Call of Duty is so different in terms of like the time to death than the games I usually play. So I adjusted to that, but I got good at it pretty quick, and that felt great, because some of the more recent Call of Duty games, it feels like if you haven't been playing it for 100 hours and gotten all your shit, you're never going to win. You know, and that's not how this goes.
Yeah, it feels much more balanced to me than a lot of the other recent Call of Duty games.
And your loadouts and all your unlocks go between Warzone and the main.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so like I've played a lot of Warzone, so I had a lot of stuff unlocked for the main multiplayer. So I got to just use my Warzone loadout, which was not perfect because one of my things in there was C4, which is great for a battle royale, does nothing in a fucking deathmatch.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever used C4 in multiplayer in a Call of Duty game ever.
I need to make a loadout with an actual grenade, because I keep hitting the grenade button and then slowly planting my C4 and stepping back, and like that actually isn't going to help me here, guys. Like we're not like putting it kind of in some modes you could say you're going to defend the position by putting it, but it doesn't do enough. It's too crazy.
Yeah, and you're probably just going to get shot before you have a chance to ignite it.
Yeah. So one of the they had 3 modes, I think, to play in this free multiplayer weekend. They had the hardpoint one, which was pretty cool. And then the normal domination, which is the 3 points. which is like Control and Destiny. And then they had Kill Confirmed, which is still my favorite multiplayer mode Call of Duty's ever given us. Because Kill Confirmed is the one good thing that came out of Modern Warfare 3. No one remembers it originated with Modern Warfare 3, but I paid for that game with my fucking allowance because this was high school, or however the fuck I got money back then. And that game was awful, but Kill Confirmed was cool. And now other, like Destiny does Kill Confirmed and stuff like that. And it's like the one mode that game did that was good. But anyway, so Modern Warfare, you were right, Sean. It's a good game.
It's a very good game. One of the best games from last year, for sure.
Yeah. So, anywho, that's the stuff. Sean, do you want to talk some Gundam?
I think it's time, Jonathan, for us to move to Weekly Suit Gundam. Hello and welcome to Weekly Suit Gundam, the special bonus podcast brought to you by the folks at the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I'm Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here, back, Jonathan, in the world of Gundam, now with a brand new mobile report. Whatever the fuck a mobile report is. This is new mobile report, Gundam Wing.
Also known as Mobile Suit Gundam Wing in the West, or just Gundam Wing.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Or Gundam W, as it is usually just stylized as.
You have your Tall Geese, your Gunpla. Was this a master build?
Yes, I have my master grade Tall Geese right in front of us, and then I also brought over my real grade Gundam Wing Zero from the Endless Waltz with the big wings.
But it says on there Gundam W, and there you go. So that's where the Gundam W comes from, that's how it's on a lot of the packaging. But yes, we're talking about Gundam Wing today in kind of a full circle moment because we are Americans talking about Gundam.
Yes.
And it's possible we might not even know about it if Gundam Wing hadn't made the splash it did here.
Yes, it has been... March 6th was the 20th anniversary of the initial airing of Gundam Wing in the West. So it has been basically 20 years, that makes me feel so fucking old when I think about that Gundam Wing started airing 20 years ago.
Yep.
2 decades.
I don't know if I ever watched it on Toonami. I remember the commercials, absolutely. I don't remember the show, really. Like, I just watched the whole show again, and I don't remember anything from it. But I was obviously aware of it. And how much of it did you watch on Toonami back in the day?
Just scattered episodes. So if you go back and listen to the first episode of Weekly Suit Gundam, I talk about on that episode my path to getting into mecha and talking about how when I was a kid, I thought mecha shows were dumb. And, to be fair, the only mecha show I had really watched was Gundam Wing. I had seen little bits of G Gundam, but in my head that was Dragon Ball. That was not a mecha show because it's way more Dragon Ball than it is a mecha show. And Gundam Wing is, to be fair, mostly a very dumb show. It has some things that are very good about it, but it gets very fucking dumb. But it was very much a right time, right place kind of thing when it came out over here. And anybody that is in our age range or a little bit older than us has heard about Gundam, it is because of Gundam Wing. Like, it is 100% Gundam Wing, and its huge popularity in that Toonami block that made not just Gundam, but like mecha anime more broadly speaking, I feel like, or more traditional mecha anime, stuff that's not like a little bit weirder like EVA, definitely got its sort of push over here through Gundam Wing.
Yeah, so that's what we're talking about today. I'm sure you'll give us more of a history lesson in a little bit. Should we just give our initial thoughts before we jump in?
Yeah, so I'm on... Like, Gundam Wing is definitely a show where I feel like I have given small comments here and there throughout Weekly Suit Gundam because it casts such a large shadow in the Western fan base. It is a show that I think a lot about because it is a show that is discussed in the Western fan base a lot. And in my opinions on it, I think are pretty well known that, like, it's okay, but it's kind of dumb and it's not great. But how did you feel about it, Jonathan, with your first time watching it now?
And we should say, for anyone wondering, we are talking about the 49 episodes of the TV series and the OVA sequel, Mobile Suit, or Weekly Gundam Wing. We've got too many Gundams.
New mobile report, Gundam Wing Endless Waltz, which was a 3-part OVA series in 97 in Japan, and then in 98 they sort of cut it all together into a big movie, and we watched the movie version. The movie version is what is on Crunchyroll if you're streaming it through Crunchyroll.
Yes, and it's the one that I don't think anyone watches the original OVA version anymore.
No, I think it's pretty hard to find.
Yeah. The Blu-ray that's out in America has both versions, which is cool. Yeah. But anyway, so we're talking about the whole Gundam Wing experience minus all the, like, manga stuff.
Yeah, because Endless Waltz is effectively like an epilogue to the show, so we figured might as well put it in here because especially I feel like I feel like there would not be a lot to talk about with Endless Waltz if we did our own podcast on it.
Sure.
So I just put it onto this
It
one.
very much feels like how the Christmas special for Doctor Who functions in relation to any Doctor Who season.
Yes. That's a good comparison.
Literally because it starts at Christmas. But anyway, so your question was, what did I think of it? And Gundam Wing was a weird one for me because I started out and I watched the first 5 episodes in one night and had a great time because I think Gundam Wing has a really strong start. Mm-hmm. And I watched like the next 5 and I think those were still good. Like I think the first 15 or so are very good. Like everything up through when Zex and Hero have their big fight in Antarctica, which is kind of the end of phase 1 of the show. Mm-hmm. I think all of that is not perfect, but it's pretty good. And then when they move to space, things start falling off. Yeah. And the initial space section has, I think, a lot of rough material. And then you get into the third phase where Relina comes back after a very weird long absence. Mm-hmm. And you get into the Sant Kingdom stuff. And they start talking about pacifism. Kanzen Heiwa, perfect peace.
Yes. True pacifism.
Yes. And I'm like, oh, this is getting dumb. And then they go back to space and gets more dumb. And like basically it's this slow, like every portion of Gundam Wing is worse than the portion that comes before, to my mind.
Yeah.
And it just is this slow slide until like the last 10 episodes were a kind of grind to get through. And I was like checking my phone a lot and I was kind of checked out of a lot of it. But I will say I did really like Endless Waltz when we got to that.
Endless Waltz is pretty good, yeah.
Endless Waltz is good. I think it is a good, it's not like a masterpiece or anything, but I think it is a super solid Gundam movie. It totally feels like a movie to me, like watching
it is. Yeah, it is. It's not like 08 The Mass Team or something like that.
Yeah.
It is clearly designed as one contiguous story that, for production reasons, and sort of to maybe boost sales, they split it up into 3 chunks.
Right. And Endless Waltz, when we get there, I'll just say like it does a lot of what I wish the series did in the movie. Like it addresses a lot of my complaints. Not enough to like then I go back and say Gundam Wing is a masterpiece. But it definitely left me more positive on the overall experience. My, I think, general opinion is probably in line with yours, is that I would never call Gundam Wing a bad show. I've seen bad shows. I don't think it's a bad show. Yeah. I think there are probably parts that verge on bad, definitely. But like overall, like there's enough I like about it. I like the animation generally. The mobile suit designs are the clear standout of the series, and they're fucking great. The music, as always, for Gundam is great. The voice acting, as always, is fantastic. I generally like the characters, even if I think the show does not serve its characters well very frequently, and I think that's something I liked about Endless Waltz, is that I think it serves its characters very well, and it does better with the team balance than the show literally ever does. So it's a show with a lot of frustrations, but especially I think I'm happy Endless Waltz was the capper, because it definitely left me in a more positive place than the actual series finale did, which is a fine series finale. It's just like I would say the series finale of Gundam Wing is as good relative to the rest of the series as other Gundam finales are. It's just relative to the rest of the series means something very different for Gundam Wing.
Yeah.
So the show kind of left me on a and then the movie left me on a you know what, that's okay. And so I'm very glad I watched it. I have some fond memories of it and some very annoyed memories, but I also think it's a really interesting show to talk about. So that's kind of my overall breakdown of Gundam Wing, having just finished it last night.
Yeah, because I think it is one of those where it's not a bad show. It is more that it is a frustrating show because it has so much potential. There's so much in it that is really good. What's frustrating is that the stuff that's in it that is not particularly good is the most important stuff, and that it's like the character storytelling around the characters and the plotting is really poor, and it gets worse as it goes along. But the conception of the characters and the design of the characters, the world, the music, the mobile suit designs, the feel of the show, like the tone, particularly early on, there's a really great sense of tone. Like all those things, the aesthetics of everything around the show are awesome, but then it's got a kind of really flimsy core, and as the show goes on, that core becomes more and more exposed. Is kind of how I feel about it.
Absolutely, and it is frustrating because it feels like like a Gundam show that just didn't have good planning, because it's constantly tossing out good ideas, I think.
Oh yeah,
and
there's a lot of stuff that's set up in the first kind of salvo of episodes that ends up just getting kind of weirdly dropped.
Yeah, but even in the last half, there's stuff where I'm like, okay, polish this and it could work really well. Leave it unpolished and it's frustrating.
Yeah.
That's the thing. This is a show that is frustrating not because of the absence of good, but because of the presence of it.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So, before we do your whole history lesson, Sean, I do have a show and tell for us. I mean, it's a podcast, so you're not going to see it, but we can talk about it.
You can just Google and you can see what it looks like.
Yeah. So, I found on eBay a couple months ago, and I'd kind of been waiting for the right time to talk about it. We've talked a little bit before, and I still want to do a whole episode about it at some point. The original Yoshiyuki Tomino novel adaptation of Gundam, Mobile Suit Gundam. This is from 79 and 80, his 3-volume adaptation, now published in English in 1 volume, translated by Frederick L. Schote. But that translation originally debuted in the United States much earlier. This was published originally by Del Rey Books in 1990. And one of the reasons they did the big all-in-one volume a couple years ago is because they had gone out of print very early on and become very difficult to find, and because they were the only official English translations, were commanding high prices. Well, now that the full book is out, I've been able to find on eBay, I found for this was like $5. Volume 1. Volume 2 and 3 are hard to find, but I found Volume 1 of the original English translation. And I think I wanted to mention this in the context of Gundam Wing, because this was actually the first attempt to bring Gundam to the U.S., was Frederick L. Schote's translation, because it was a lot cheaper to get the rights to a book than the rights to a show.
And it's a lot cheaper to translate a book than have to translate and market a show and find like a distribution platform. You can just fucking translate a book and sell
put it
that
out.
thing.
Yep, because it's Ballantine books, so it literally, this was sold in an auction with a bunch of other just old Del Rey, this size paperback books. These were really popular in the 80s and 90s. If you go to used bookstores, you'll see tons of these. The price of this, when it came out, was $4.95. Try finding a paperback for that much today.
Yeah, looking at it just makes it feel like a book you'd find in your school library when we were kids.
Yes, at 100%. And it's really fascinating to look through, because the underlying translation is the same one that we have today. Schote has touched it up a little bit. The big difference is, when he did this translation, no one had ever officially translated Gundam into English, and so there was no style guide.
Yeah.
So Sunrise had never created, this is how you spell Amuro, this is how you spell Char, all of that stuff. So going through it is really uncanny, because there's Amuro's first name is spelled the same, but his last name is now officially spelled R-A-Y.
Yeah.
And he spells it R-E-Y. Which I totally understand as a spelling based on the katakana, but it's weird because that's not how we spell it anymore. Probably the craziest one, just in terms of how much this person's name is in the book, is Char, which he spells S-H-A, as Sha.
Yeah, which is, if you're looking at the way it's translated, if you transliterated it from Japanese into English, that is what it would look like.
Yes, yeah. Sha. Sha Aznable. Aznable is the same, but it's Shah Aznable instead of Shar, which should be Char, because that's how we spell things in English, but we just have to know it's Char.
Yeah, but it's like fake French.
Yes, fake French. Sayla is S-A-I-L-A, so there's stuff like that you have to get used to. Zeon is the same, but the Zabi family is the Zavi family. The Zaku is just the Zak, he drops the U.
But when you look at it, that's 100% just pronounced Zak.
Yes.
You would never look at that word and say, oh, that's pronounced Zak.
Yeah.
And so it's...
That's the one transliteration in here that I don't understand why he did it that way. Yeah. Everything else
because it just sounds awful. It's like, oh, he hopped in his Zak.
Yeah, hopped in his Zak. Let's see, here's some fun ones. Lala is L-A-L-A, and then it's S-U-N, so it looks like it's Lala's son.
Yeah.
Which I do think is a weird one, too. The E at the end of Soon does help you know how to say that. Makuve is Ma, and then Kube. So it looks like someone saying, hey, Ma Kube.
To be fair, it makes way more sense than how it's than our official version we have now with the apostrophe.
Yes, which I had to literally ask you how the fuck they're saying that. So, yes, this is just the first book of the 3, so I have not found volumes 2 and 3, but it's a super important piece of Gundam history, because I'm literally, Sean, you and I are holding it here, flipping through it. Yep. This is the first Gundam thing that came out in the West. And it did not make a big splash as a book. It sold apparently quite well for this level of book, but this level of book is not something that would go on to become a phenomenon, you know? And I think it's also important because you get Schote's original translation note, which has not been reproduced elsewhere. So it's here. He explains some of his choices. He even says here, for example, the name of Amuro Rei's arch rival is often written as Char, C-H-A-R, whereas I have chosen Sha, which is closer to the original. So he's talking to the fan base that has cropped up on early internet forums, probably.
Yeah, importing VHS tapes and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yep. I also think one of the funny things is, the show's Japanese title is Kito Senshi Gundam, which he translated as The Gundam Mobile Suit, which is the name of the book, and then the three names. This one also did not have any of the illustrations from the original Tomino books, which are in the modern translation. But I had found this on eBay when I was bored one night a couple months ago, and I brought it with me because I was like, Sean should see this. It's a weird piece of history. You actually have copies of the Japanese ones here.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Not originals, I assume.
No, yeah, they're modern reprints.
Yeah.
But yes. So because it is fun, I'm going to read the back of it for people to have context,
because this is trying to sell Gundam to people who don't know what a Gundam is.
Exactly, yeah. This is like 1990 in America. No Gundam media had been brought over. And after this, it would be like very weird, spotty, one-time bullshit before Gundam Wing kind of actually got a proper release. So this is them trying to sell Gundam to us. Welcome to the astonishing world of Gundam. This extraordinary science fiction saga created by Yoshiyuki Tomino began as an animated television series in Japan in 1979, and grew into a veritable industry of books, films, toys, and comics. But most importantly, Tomino's Gundam series marked the beginning of the, quote, robot fever that has swept both Japan and the United States. The Mobile Suit is the prototype for all the realistic robots we've encountered in the past 10 years. The Gundam story has all the classic elements of great science fiction, a devastating civil war between the Federation of Earth and their rebellious off-world colonies, fought in the far reaches of space and the near reaches of Earth's moon. The warriors must confront two unforeseen enemies, a, quote, new type pilot who possesses a highly evolved and potentially lethal consciousness, and the enormous humanoid battleships, don't know if I'd use that word, known as mobile suits, monstrous and invulnerable. Now in English for the first time, Volume 1 Awakening, the tyrannical Zavi dynasty plans to use the Civil War to further its own ends. It has mastered Zeon, and now it threatens to crush all Federation loyalists. Amuro Ray, a young Federation cadet, is about to meet his first challenge as a Gundam fighter pilot, testing a new advanced mobile suit amid the brutal reality of interplanetary combat, facing an enemy who is more vital to his very existence than anyone in all the galaxies. There's only one galaxy. It's just the Milky Way.
Yes.
It's definitely got a little bit of that, like, let's throw some sci-fi lingo, even if it doesn't apply, like Battleship Gundam.
Yep. And they're talking about Lala in that last chapter, not Char, because all the Lala stuff is in the first third of the novel.
Yeah, the novel is very different than the TV show. Yeah.
The novel, they never go to Earth. So
so that is not a mistake in the back of that synopsis where he just says in the far reaches of space and the near reaches of the Earth's moon, which I do like that turn of phrase. I think is pretty slick.
It's pretty good. So yeah, I mean, I think a pretty good job trying to sell it. But yeah, that was the first attempt. Sean, let's continue with our history lesson.
Yeah, so let's do the Toonami version first, and then we'll talk about how it went in Japan. Okay. Just to segue off of talking about that from 1990. So after that, in terms of us with Gundam, again, they're like spotty, weird one-offs. Like, I think the first movie got like a weird dub that's like a super old dub. I think that's the one where Bright is British. I forget which one Bright is British. One of the dubs, English dubs, Bright is British, which is... he is supposed to be, but it's very weird when you actually hear it.
Yes.
Like, in the terms of the setting, he is supposed to be from Britain, but... yeah, so then in the year 2000, in March 2000, Toonami was a thing. It was gaining popularity. It was getting momentum. And Gundam Wing, Mobile Suit Gundam Wing, as it was called over here, the original title, the literal translation of the original title in Japan is New Mobile Report Gundam Wing. It came over here, and it got super popular super quickly. And I have, like, very distinct memories of this, like, transition point where all of a sudden... people at my elementary school were wearing Gundam Wing shirts and stuff like that. Because, as with any good child media, it is not really about whatever the media is. It's about how much you can sell off of that media. Because, one of the ways that Gundam did get a foothold over here in, like, the consumer hobbyist realm was Gunpla did get imported. So that's probably honestly where most of the American fan base was pre-Gundam Wing, was people going to their local hobby shop and finding plastic models and not having a context maybe for what this was for a TV show, but boy, these are some cool looking fucking robot models, and Gunpla are the best plastic robot models in the world, in that business. Like, there are other franchises try to do the same thing, nothing does it as well as Gunpla does. So
I mean, there's literally Gunpla made for non-Gundam stuff.
exactly, yeah. So there's like, those little pockets, but Gundam Wing sort of buoyed by the whole anime wave of the early 2000s with stuff like Dragon Ball, Yu Yu Hakusho, Rurouni Kenshin, Sailor Moon, those kinds of shows.
Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh.
That's like a slightly different. That's like there's the 4Kids anime.
That's true.
And then there's the anime, which was Toonami.
I just don't want to forget that this is the time period where a Pokemon movie debuted in the United States at #1.
Yes,
and could be that big. Yeah,
but the pitch for Toonami very much, and this is where I think Gundam Wing's popularity slots in, is that Toonami aimed itself as this like it's anime for adults, even though it's actually for kids. Right? Yes. It is this, even though a lot of them were censored. Like Dragon Ball very famously is like heavily censored with like blood and watered down translation and stuff like that. You don't just get like spouts of blood shooting out of like the hole in Goku's chest at the end of episode 5 or whatever when your main character gets killed at the beginning of Dragon Ball Z. It was still definitely watered down, and it was actually for kids because it did air on Cartoon Network. They were like more sophisticated looking shows that had characters that had more realistic proportions. They didn't have, when you think about a lot of like Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon, those are very formulaic episodic style shows that have a more, I think you'd kind of call it chibified design, versus the much more hard edge, more sort of like arc-based storytelling that you got that was more sort of serialized, which is a typical show that was on Toonami. And Gundam Wing is a really good example of that kind of show. And it has this particular level of 90s like edge to it. It's got this very like edgy teenage bullshit quality to it.
I think how you would define it is it's not actually edgy, but it pretends to be.
Exactly.
Like Hiro Yui never actually kills anyone, but he sure does threaten to kill people a lot.
Yeah, and his attitude, it has this 90s edge to it. And, the year 2000 is still the 90s in terms of like culturally in America. And it has that feel to it.
Like, frankly, Gundam Wing slots into that a lot more naturally than Dragon Ball ever did, because the thing they had to do with Dragon Ball Z in English to give it this is that they had to like kind of rip out all the Toriyama humor.
Yeah,
and, like,
they had to give it like this hard like rock kind of feel to the soundtrack.
Yeah, like all this stuff that like you look at it and to me it's like that's not Dragon Ball, but like they had to give it like this little kind of personality transplant to make the parts that did fit like stand out.
Yeah, so the original marketing and kind of dubbing work for Dragon Ball definitely emphasized the like big ridiculous fights over everything else, even though Dragon Ball has a lot more in it. So it's this wave of shows that got me into anime, like broadly speaking. I watched Toonami every night it was on, for as much as I could. But there were like a handful of shows, and Gundam Wing is an example of this, that like just didn't really interest me much. And to be fair, I was 8 years old when Gundam Wing was airing. So I was definitely younger than its target demographic. Its target demographic being, I think, exactly 13 to 14-year-olds. And anything outside of that, maybe you're kind of losing them a little bit. Because Gundam Wing postures itself both with like the edgy kind of aesthetic of its characters and the attitude of its characters. It's got a lot of tude. But it also postures itself by evoking the aesthetics of politics and politicking, maybe not actually having any of the substance there, which would be my criticism, but it sure sounds like a show that's talking about things that are very deep, even if it is a show that has no conception of how politics shape something like war or pacifism.
Yes, it's an incredibly dumb show about politics, but it has the seriousness with which like high schoolers talk about politics and know nothing. Or like, frankly, like you say 13 and 14-year-olds, this would also, I think, be very popular with fucking college freshmen who think they're smarter than they are. Yeah. Like that's what it really,
it's that, it's you, for 13 or 14, you're in there and then it sort of dips a bit and then, then you're like 18, go to college, are scared because you're in a dorm and you don't know anybody and it spikes up again. It's like, but Gundam Wing really speaks to me.
Yeah, and like Relina definitely sounds like a college freshman who took a gap year and like feels like she knows all about the world, but she really knows nothing.
Yeah, and so and all of those things appeal to a certain audience that Toonami really cultivated. And I think I read a bunch of reviews, modern reviews of Gundam Wing, just to like get a sense of, for the people who were into Gundam Wing when it aired on Toonami, what are their feelings today? And I think a lot of it is people recognizing they have a lot of nostalgia and affection for it through nostalgia, but maybe the show doesn't hold up. And I think the best point, I think this was on a a Blu-ray review, I think on the Anime News Network. The guy said, basically, when he was a kid or a teenager watching this show, he thought, man, this show is like so deep and it's so complicated that it's just going over my head because I'm so young. And then he rewatches as an adult and realized, no, the show just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not deep and complicated. It just, there's no logic kind of building the connections behind the scenes of the show. And so it kind of falls apart. But it definitely, it postures itself so well that when you're that age and you're the right age for it, I think it does come across really well. And things that we look at and kind of roll our eyes at when you're that young, you just kind of skim over and you're just, obsessed with how cool Hero is and how awesome the Gundam Death Scythe looks and that kind of stuff. The aesthetics of the show that are very well executed, those are the more important thing to the younger audience. And so I think that's where a lot of its fan base comes from.
I also think it's worth talking about dubbing versus the original Japanese here, because I think in its original Japanese, and I've only watched it now as a 27-year-old, so I can't speak to what I would have felt younger. I think in Japanese, the dumbness of it kind of comes across easier because you're having these world-class seiyuu doing these stupid lines.
And people say some phenomenally stupid stuff in the show.
Yes,
yeah.
And I think it's more obvious. It's like in a bad X-Men movie and you have Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen there. The badness of it kind of comes through more because you have some of the greatest actors of their generation.
Yeah, that are punching so far above the weight of the material they're given.
Yeah, and when you have like Hikaru Midorikawa doing some of what he has to do and like the 7th time he says, Omayo Goros.
Or him just muttering under his breath, Didina. Which is maybe like 50% of his dialogue in this show.
You kind of roll your eyes. There's something about the like... Because the English actors were not world-class actors for Gundam Wing.
I mean,
some of them are fine.
For a dub of its period, it's pretty good, but it's very, like, everything is very underplayed in a way that feels very weird if you watch it now.
Yes, but I think that in some ways, especially for an American audience, probably suited the material better. Mm-hmm. It's actually a remarkably faithful dub if you like go back and forth especially for that period. Like if you look at it versus some of the other shows on Toonami, like Dragon Ball switched to the dub in any scene and they're talking about something just completely unrelated. Mm-hmm. But Gundam Wing isn't like that at all. But it definitely like I don't know like I think Zex, for instance, his Japanese voice is fantastic. But Zex is also such a dumb and inconsistent character at a certain point that you listen to his English voice and you're like, that almost fits better in a weird way. Because,
I can kind of see that. And an important note there also is that there were 2 different versions of Gundam Wing that aired. There was in the, like, sort of afternoon slot, there was the kiddie version, which, kind of made the translation slightly more palatable. And, I mean, and it's some stuff that's dumb. Like, they wouldn't say it's like, I'm the god of death when Duo says that line, the Shinigami line that he likes a lot. Instead, he's like, I'm the great destroyer. Like... It's that obsession with like bad early anime dubs or like game translations in America that would just refuse to use the word kill, and so it's a lot of people saying, "I'm going to defeat you" in pure anger, with like bloodshot eyes and rage because they murdered his like younger sister or something.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to defeat you so hard right now. You're going to be so defeated.
It was one of the weirder trends of like. I mean, and it's to this day, American stuff aimed at kids or young adults has trouble talking about death. I think Harry Potter was one thing that like helped maybe push that in a different direction in terms of establishing like a YA fiction that could do that. But like certainly at the time, like anything for like 13 or under, death wasn't a thing, just didn't happen. Dragon Ball was actually a really good fit for that because it's not a thing in Dragon Ball.
Yes,
people
really. Die and then they just come back immediately.
Yes, or they die and then they're still there in another realm.
Yes, they're just having fun, hanging out with a monkey on a planet in the hell, or not in the planet floating above the home for infinite losers.
The Hiffle,
excuse me. Yes,
the Hiffle. Yes, but yeah, I'm actually curious how Gundam Wing did some of the visual edits because it's actually a pretty violent show. Like compared to the other Gundams, it has more like blood and like direct. Like Mobile Suit Gundam has a lot of people exploding in battle suits, but like this one has a lot of people getting shot, which is a little different.
Which I think they mostly just kind of like edited out blood for that. And then there was a late night airing slot, which is basically the Adult Swim slot, and that's where you'd have I'm the god of death. Scandalous that he would say something like that.
And actually, while we're on that, Sean, let me edit in here.
Yeah.
Because it aired actually back to back with Dragon Ball Z in its first televised uncut airing,
which is how I would have watched bits and pieces of Gundam Wing. Mostly is to actually just get to Dragon Ball, which was the show I wanted to watch.
So, I mean, we played one Toonami promo for you at the beginning, but here's Peter Cullen telling us all about the Dream Team block of Dragon Ball and Gundam Wing.
Get ready for a double whammy. Let's get started. Monday through Friday night, Toonami's taking over the TV. Here's the breakdown. Midnight, Gundam Wing, uncut. Yeah, you heard me. 12:30 Dragon Ball Z, the greatest action cartoon ever made. Unbelievable! Toonami, the Midnight Run. Tonight, midnight to 1 a.m. Thank us later. Only Toonami.
But yes, so that was because that was at the time that Funimation was making their first releases of Dragon Ball uncut, and uncut is a weird thing because it just meant visually uncut. Everything else was changed still, but but Gundam Wing like kept the music and everything in the dub, right? It didn't change.
The music's the same. Yeah, like they would use the music a lot in promos on Toonami. Yeah. And that is like, that's for me, a lot of the story of Gundam Wing is, even if I didn't particularly like the show itself when I would watch it, it fit into the aesthetic of Toonami so perfectly that those promos are great. I love, there's like one of their longer promos they did just has Peter Cullen, Optimus Prime just say, one of the greatest anime sagas of all time, Gundam.
From the Gundam universe, a new chapter in one of the greatest anime sagas of all time, Gundam Wing. Weekdays at 5:30. Suit up.
And it's just like, anytime you can get Optimus Prime to just say, Gundam. That's my shit. That is 100% my shit. So people who haven't, you should like watch a bunch of old Toonami promos on YouTube. You should just go to town. There's lots of great compilations people have put together of like shitty VHS rips of whatever Toonami block was airing when they were a kid.
Yep, it's good stuff. I also like the version of what they did for the ending credits on Toonami was instead of using "It's Just Love," the actual ending theme from the Japanese version,
animation, all that. Yeah.
Right. They had it was a changed version of the opening credits with an instrumental version of Just Communication that fucking rips. I mean, listen to this. It's good stuff, and I can totally I actually feel like I might remember that from like leading into other stuff because it's such a like iconic little, and it feels so much like all the ending sequences in Toonami. Because I don't think anime in the U.S. ever aired on TV with like its Japanese end themes intact. That's just not something.
No, because we would have like really contracted versions of the credits that would then lead into, because that would be like, and then like on the other side of the screen usually it's like, and next up Dragon Ball Z or whatever.
Exactly.
You get a lot of that.
Right. So anyway, a lot of the stuff around it. It was fun for me doing this project this week, Sean, going back and looking through a bunch of the Toonami promos and being like, I love that little robot guy.
He's so good, Tom. It's just that is some of like the purest nostalgia I have from my childhood. Is Toonami. It's who knows if we would ever even be doing this podcast if I had not watched Toonami as a kid at an impressionable age and shaped a lot of my media tastes.
Yep.
Thing that also there is, I tried so long, Jonathan, to find this Flash game that was on the Cartoon Network website to play it again ahead of this podcast, because it is actually my most enduring memory of Gundam Wing, because I didn't like the show that much, but back in the early days of the 2000s, in that era of the internet, it was a lot of like Flash animations, Flash games, and Cartoon Network had a whole Toonami website, and they would have a bunch of Flash games based on their the different anime properties that they had. There was a really bad Dragon Ball one that I played a lot that had really bad looking art where like characters were really off model, and Trunks would go Super Saiyan, but his hair would still be down. It would just be yellow, and you're like, this is just really poorly put together. But there was a Gundam Wing one, I think called like Gundam Wing Battle Assault, something like that. And it was basically like a checkers style game where you were the 5 Gundam pilots against an army of Leos, the Space Leos, which are one of the grunt mobile suits in Gundam Wing. And it would just be you trying to like, it's like very, very simplistic, basic checkers style strategy kind of tactic stuff. And I think you had different attacks. It was like rock, paper, scissors. And it was a fun little game that had a very good kind of chiptunesy sounding version of Just Communication, or particularly it was just like the opening jingle at the beginning. I think just mostly looped. That's my memory of the soundtrack. But yeah, so there is actually another game, a Super Famicom game that I did play through emulation, just because I couldn't find this shitty Flash game. That is called Gundam Wing Endless Duel, not Endless Waltz, but Endless Duel, which is a 1996 Super Famicom game. Never came out over here because Gundam Wing wasn't out over here. But it is a 1v1 fighting game, like Street Fighter style, and that game kicks ass. It has a pretty good reputation in the fighting game community, which is why I knew about it. So if people want to boot up a Super Famicom or Super NES emulator and check out Endless Duel, that is a really, really good Super Famicom era one-on-one fighting game that I think holds up shockingly well.
Sean, I think I might have found your game. Was it Gundam Wing Wing Assault?
Yes, Gundam Wing Wing Assault. That is 100% it. There's the shitty...
Yeah, so let's watch a little bit of this. Wow, Sean, there's a lot of memories I didn't even know about.
Yeah, it is, this is for me, even though I didn't like this show when it aired, I have a weird nostalgia for Gundam Wing just because of its association with all this other stuff. But I think that's enough about how it came over here in my history with it and just like the impact it had. Because again, very good chances we would never be doing a Weekly Suit Gundam podcast if Gundam Wing had not come out. Because I don't think it would ever be on my radar if I did not have that little seed of Gundam Wing in the back of my memory.
Not Gundam Seed, but Seed of Gundam Wing.
Yes, no. Gundam Seed, weirdly enough, wasn't super popular when it aired over here, even though it's like maybe this most popular, second most popular Gundam show in Japan.
I mean, this is actually something I wanted to ask about.
Yes.
So Gundam Wing is still the most popular one to ever air on American television.
Mm-hmm.
I think other Gundam shows have become bigger, like within the fandom here and whatnot.
Yeah.
But like, what else aired after this? And what was the history? Because G Gundam, I know, aired in its entirety on Cartoon Network. You talked about that.
Yeah, so G Gundam, I think that was like 2002. Gundam Seed did come over here. They did the like weird kind of original Mobile Suit Gundam one that we talked about that didn't pan out well because partially it came out
right before 9/11.
Yeah, it's bad timing, and also this is a good example of Mobile Suit Gundam is a demonstrably significantly better show than Gundam Wing in every single conceivable way. But it does not fit the Toonami block at all.
No.
So it would never get that kind of popularity over here. But yeah, Mobile Fighter G Gundam comes out, Gundam Seed got a full dub, and those were like Toonami era shows. And then you get 00 Gundam, which is 2007, I want to say. And I think that got a full dub treatment. And I think by that point it wasn't really Toonami, it was like Adult Swim. Because that show is also a little bit more, that's a little bit too adult probably for Cartoon Network Toonami, and we weren't like kind of editing shows down at that point. And then after that, I think it mostly just like that's when you kind of get the drought in the West where anime wasn't really coming over much, didn't get a lot of dubbing work, and then it picks up more once we get into stuff like Gundam Build Fighters, Iron Blooded Orphans, and
now all that's just Crunchyroll.
Yeah, Crunchy and anime streaming becomes such a big thing that when those shares go up or those shows go up on a streaming service like Funimation or Crunchyroll, they are some of the most popular shows. Like Iron Blooded Orphans was in like the top 3 most popular shows while it was airing on Crunchyroll every single week. So the Gundam fandom has transitioned, as any anime fandom has, away from needing dubbed TV airings. But it definitely was Gundam Wing, G Gundam, Gundam Seed are the ones I think of in that Toonami realm. And then 00 Gundam definitely had its airing as well.
Because it's funny just how much Gundam hasn't ever even been dubbed. Like, we're talking about Gundam Wing, and the immediate follow-up After War Gundam X has no dub and only came out on home video here like a couple of years ago or something.
Yeah,
right?
it's a very new release in the West. Yeah,
and like does Turn A have a dub?
I don't think it has a dub.
So just like if you go through, so the next one would have been Gundam Seed, which would have been airing in Japan while Gundam Wing was airing in the West. So that makes sense. But like it's kind of funny. And like you go back, like Gundam and Zeta have dubs, although they're completely different. And then Double Zeta doesn't have one, and then like Victory doesn't have one, and it's all. And then
some modern stuff like Unicorn Gundam does get it, but it's a weird. Gundam in the West is a very weird kind of spotty franchise.
Just watch it in Japanese because it's better.
Yes, yeah. And I think part of it is that just like since it didn't get big over here until almost like halfway through at this point, if we look at last year was the 40-year anniversary of the Gundam franchise. This year is the 20-year anniversary of Gundam Wing and Gundam getting popular over here. So it kind of hit over here about halfway through from right now its lifespan. So I think part of that is just like what is responsible for this weird, very spotty. Especially if you're looking into Gundam video games, it is super because I have been part of the reason why I played Endless Duel is I'm looking at ways to do good emulation for some of the Saturn games that are supposed to be really cool that have never been released in a good way in any other form and have never come out over here. So Gundam fandom is weird. But let's go back to 1995, Jonathan, shortly after Mobile Fighter G Gundam. That's where Mobile Suit Gundam Wing, or New Mobile Report Gundam Wing, or Shin Kido Senki Gundam Wing, as it is known in Japan. And so sort of the story behind how Gundam Wing is made is pretty interesting. And I went down a very deep rabbit hole, Jonathan, because I had no idea what the actual production history of Gundam Wing is. And it is spotty and complicated and weird, and it had some huge production difficulties that explain a lot of what happens in the second half of the show.
Right. I mean, the one I know is that the director left halfway through, and that's like coincides immediately with where the show loses all sense of plot. So
yeah. So let's try to lay out what happens here. So Mobile Fighter G Gundam finishes airing. G Gundam is a little bit more popular than Victory Gundam, but is still not a huge hit in Japan. But it does pretty good on Gunpla sales.
Yeah, it helped. It brought the merchandising back, but wasn't a huge ratings hit.
Yeah, exactly. And so Sunrise is like, okay, we'll go ahead with another Gundam series. And like with G Gundam, a lot of the sort of basic premise and setup for the show was mostly provided by Sunrise and the sponsors that were manufacturing the merchandise. And so a lot of the basic things like we want 5 Gundam pilots again because, boy, if you have 5 main Gundams in the show, that sure gives a lot of good marketing behind different Gunpla figures rather than only having one. So we'll have 5 main Gundams. So we'll have 5 different Gundam pilots. And then according to, this was an interview with one of the main producers, who's kind of like, honestly, like one of the main guys who you can get information on about the show because the director left halfway through. I've never found a direct interview with Ikeda, the director. So Hideyuki Tomioka, who's the producer, he's talked about how basic stuff like we want one of the Gundams to turn into a plane, we want one of them to have stretchy arms, we want one of them to have like the big guns and stuff. So a lot of those basic sort of concepts for what those Gundams were going to be was also provided by the sponsors. And so they started with that as the kind of premise and the setup for the show, and then went from there and kind of assembled the staff to make the show. So the main place he went to was he had worked with a number of different people on a show called Samurai Troopers, which going back to Toonami was another show that I did actually watch on Toonami that is basically about like weird samurai dudes with like magic armor. And I thought, oh, this will be cool when they put it on Crunchyroll. And I watched it, I'm like, this show is garbage. But the main producer, Tomioka, worked on that show. And so he was like, okay, let's take the director for that show, Masashi Ikeda, and the writer for that show, Katsuyuki Sumisawa, and let's use them to create this Gundam show. And so we start with Masashi Ikeda as the director, and he kind of takes a lot of the basic concepts that the sponsors brought over and kind of molds them into what the show's going to look like. So most of the fundamental, like, these are who the characters are, this is kind of the direction we're going with, that comes from Ikeda. And then Katsuki Sumisawa was the sort of the scenario writer and the main writer for the show for, let's say, about the first half or so before shit starts going down. And he takes a lot of those basic concepts and starts working on scripting and everything like that. So they start with that, and that's the platform which they start. But very quickly, stuff starts becoming a little bit difficult in terms of production. And basically, both Sumisawa and Tashio, sorry, what's his name? Tomioka. Yeah, Hideyuki Tomioka. So both the producer and the writer have gone on record with interviews talking about how just horrible the production conditions were and how rushed everything was, and became more and more rushed as things went along, way above what is standard. Because, you expect a certain amount of production difficulties for a show that's going to air one episode basically every week for a year. That's really fucking hard to do. But even by the standards of other shows they had worked on, Gundam Wing, they couldn't quite get ahead of the schedule enough to kind of work it out. And so that's where you get a lot of stuff where you have 2 recap episodes in the middle, a lot of planned ideas for the show, like a flashback style episodes that would have come around the middle got scrapped because they just couldn't deal with it in terms of the production pipeline. So some of those ideas and a lot of things that were cut from Gundam Wing or changed in Gundam Wing end up surfacing in spin-off manga written by the writer Sumisawa himself. So there's an episode 0 manga that has a bunch of ideas that they're going to bring into Gundam Wing about who these Gundam pilots were before they were Gundam pilots and what led them to being members of Operation Meteor and all that stuff. And little snippets of that end up getting into Endless Waltz. But so a lot of the areas where you see Gundam Wings kind of having holes in it has holes in it because of the weird production stuff. One of those main production things being that Masashi Ikeda left the show, or depending on who tells the story, he either left the show midway through or he was fired, because of the way that Japanese culture talks about this kind of stuff. It's a little bit hard to get a good sense of what is actually happened, but it's pretty clear that, he was not there by the midpoint of the show. He had left. One of the main things that happened was he had decided, kind of it seems like on his own, that at the end of episode 10, Hiro was going to self-destruct the Wing Gundam, which is what he does, right? And that's a very iconic sequence in the show. That moment was not in Sumisawa's original drafts for how the story was going to go. So when Sumisawa was told that, all of a sudden he has to take basically everything that happens after episode 10 and has to rewrite a bunch of stuff because now Hiro doesn't have his Gundam anymore, and that obviously is going to change a lot about how the show works. So that means that also by about the midpoint of the show, Sumisawa steps away as being the scenario writer or the head writer, and instead he just sort of scripts individual episodes, but he's not kind of in charge of overseeing the scripting on a larger scope. And so that also then creates weird gaps, and why some things that are set up early on in the show just kind of never materialize. Stuff like Quattro exhibiting things that seem to be setting up him being some kind of new type-like character, that just goes nowhere. And I thought is that Ikeda probably was going to introduce new types or something like new types as a concept in Gundam Wing, but he was not there for the full length of the show, so that never happened.
Or Trey's getting a complete character transplant, or Zek's getting a complete character transplant.
Yes, so lots of those things in the back half. And the person who steps in as the sub-director or whatever for after Ikeda left is Shinji Takamatsu, who was uncredited in Gundam Wing, but we know that it was him, and he is the guy who directs After War Gundam X after this, which is not to say that because the back half of Gundam Wing is bad that you should think that After War Gundam X is going to be bad, because nobody would be able to make Gundam Wing a good show stepping in halfway through with the director leaving, and also the director that was there making, let's say, some questionable choices about the production that ended up with him getting fired.
Shinji Takamatsu also had a long history with Gundam.
Yes.
And he had been directing episodes since Zeta. And then if you look at his credits after, he directed episodes of War in the Pocket, and then he did all sorts of stuff after that. So good anime director.
Yeah, exactly. And it seems like he's the kind of guy that you'd bring in as the pinch hitter of, we're fucked, but we need someone to do this role.
Yes.
I can have Ikeda. Notably with Ikeda also, he then later went on to work on Inuyasha, and I think he's the director for the first 40-something episodes of Inuyasha before he also left that show for the best sourcing I can find is just vaguely having some sort of conflict with Rumiko Takahashi, who is the mangaka, the creator of Inuyasha, as well as Urusei Yatsura, Ranma 1/2, Maison Ikoku. So she's one of the most prolific and greatest manga creators ever. So
I didn't know she did Ranma and Inuyasha.
Yeah, that's the same lady.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
No, when you look at Rumiko Takahashi's, her bibliography of everything that she's ever written, it's fucking crazy. So if you're having conflict with her, I would side with Rumiko Takahashi. That's just my policy on life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Masashi Ikeda just seems to have. It seems like he's a really hard line director based on the little bits of sourcing I can find about this stuff that ends up creating a lot of these internal conflicts in the production, and then he gets booted on the show. And that's a big contributor to how we have Gundam Wing in this weird state that it's in. That was stuff that I never knew about before I did the research for this episode. I had absolutely no idea it had this kind of, like, way more so than any other Gundam show up to this point, like, really troubled production within the staff. Because previously on Gundam series like Victory Gundam, there's definitely lots of tension between the people creating the show and the sponsors in Sunrise having their demands, notably with Victory Gundam flipping the order of the first 4 episodes. But I've never seen anything that is like, this is some like real drama and overhaul within the creative staff that's very internal.
Because up to this point, other than G Gundam, every TV show was Tomino, who came into Gundam already being a pretty powerful director.
Yeah.
And so, he has the clout to keep, not just the clout, but also clearly the skills to keep the ship on the tracks. I think G Gundam was clearly a very well directed and planned show.
Yeah.
So, because we're still in the Gundam growing pains era, right? I mean, Tomino's gone. They're doing new continuities. This is a weird transformational time for Gundam.
Yeah, and that leads into guys to talk about like the setup for Gundam Wing, generally speaking, and how important it is that while G Gundam is technically the first alternate universe Gundam show, it doesn't have a huge amount of influence on the direction of the Gundam franchise until you get to like Build Fighters that take some cues from G Gundam. But generally, I would say the tone and style and some of the ideas about how you handle alternate universe Gundam is really established in Gundam Wing, which is to say that it's a lot of, let's take some of the ideas from classic Gundam shows in movies and let's remix them up in different ways. And so let's have a Char-esque character that is very much in this one, a very Char-esque character. Let's have Relina being a Sayla-esque figure, at least in terms of her backstory, and a lot of the like broader plotting takes cues from something like a Zeta Gundam. So it takes lots of bits and pieces from classical Gundam, but then tries to remix it in unique ways. With for Gundam Wing, the main pitch being this time, instead of it being this one scared boy who ends up getting into the Gundam and learns to grow into a man over the course of the show, which is the basic plot of all the Tomino Gundam shows. This one is, we have 5 different pilots who are all experienced child soldiers, like assassins, whatever they are, that are all like on a mission from the start, and they're trying to execute that mission, and that is the setup. And so the protagonist setup for Gundam Wing is very unique and serves as an inspiration for Double O Gundam, a later show that takes a very similar setup at the start. So Gundam Wing, for all of its flaws, it does have like a good, I think, idea of how to build on the legacy of the Gundam that came before and make it something that's very identifiably Gundam, is dealing with similar themes and similar archetypes, but makes a couple of key choices that end up spinning it into something that is very much its own product. Because while Gundam Wing does have a lot of very obvious similarities, probably the biggest one being Zex having his character arc basically run through Char's entire character arc from Mobile Suit Gundam to Char's counterattack over the course of this show, those handful of big choices they make around the protagonist make Gundam Wing feel completely different than any other Gundam show.
Yeah, I was actually really surprised at that, and I think this is maybe when we can transition into talking about the text of the show, Sean.
Yeah.
Is that I start watching the series. Zex is like, it's very much like in the original Gundam. Zex is one of the first characters you meet, and he looks, especially in the out of the helmet, they start to differentiate a little bit, but in the helmet he's Char. He's just Char. And, he's talking about, and he even has a very, like, Char-like affect in that first episode, which drops a little bit. He's differentiated more later on. But you have that, you have, okay, this is a war between colonies and Earth. Like, it starts to check a lot of those boxes, but then structurally, this is by far the most different Gundam show we've watched.
Oh, yeah.
Even G Gundam structurally, like, it's episodic in a way that is more obvious than some other Gundam shows, but Tomino had a very episodic sensibility in most of his series. Particularly, I would say the original one. But this one, like Gundam Wing, it does not have a single identifiable protagonist for a lot of it. Like, I think by default you would say it's Hiro Yui, but there are periods where it doesn't really feel like that. It is episodic in that there's usually something that happens in each episode, but often things are sort of left unresolved. One half of an episode will be about one thing, one half of an episode will be about another thing. It's very bingeable, not necessarily because it's like super good, but because one episode doesn't feel like you get a lot. Whereas like I've talked before about how the original Gundam, especially that and G Gundam, but also to an extent Zeta and Double Zeta and Victory, one episode feels like a meal.
Yeah.
That's never true of Gundam Wing.
You can very easily walk away from almost any episode from those Tomino shows and be pretty happy with it. There's a couple of exceptions where he will do a few two-parters in a show, but generally speaking, you sit down and you're like, okay, shit, like if I have to stop watching after these like 20 minutes, I can walk away pretty happy and satisfied. Yeah,
Gundam Wing, there's very rarely there's an episode that feels like a complete package in that way. This was the most surprising thing for me about this being the show that made it big on Toonami, is that it is less action heavy than the Tomino shows by far.
Yeah.
It is much more talky, but it's not like less action heavy and more talky in the way G Gundam was, where G Gundam, despite its premise, is not super action heavy except in like the last 5 minutes of a given episode. But it's still I would say that's an action heavy episode in terms of plot momentum and things, right?
Yeah.
Gundam Wing is extremely talky. It is mostly characters sitting around or flying around talking about politics and philosophy in a very like low-grade freshman college kind of way we were talking about. And it's a very politics-heavy show. It is one major difference, I would say, is that Tomino's Gundam shows are pretty much always about individuals or groups taking actions that make big structural or societal impacts, right?
Yeah.
Like, if Amuro doesn't get in his Gundam, the Earth Federation is doomed, right? Like, there's things like that. You know, if Captain Bright doesn't become a really good captain, we're all fucked. You know, there's things like that. Whereas Gundam Wing, it's very hard to point to individual cases where an individual makes a difference. And I think at some points this is interesting, and some points it's a big flaw because the Gundam pilots never do anything important over the course of the show. But it's about big political movements that are much bigger than any one individual. And at its best, I think that feels actually, especially in like the first half of the show, there's some of that that's I think kind of smart and incisive in how powerless the Gundam pilots feel, because that's probably true to how wars and politics go. And then when it kind of gets dumber, it just starts to feel like, oh, this show is mistaking status quo changes for plot momentum, which are two different things. So it's very different in all of those ways. And it also, like, I think I can intellectualize and talk about all the ways, like, I understand it, like, the way you explained it and the Toonami edge factor and all those things that made it popular on Toonami. But it's not like a Dragon Ball that does have some of these big, iconic, amazing action moments. There's none of that. Like, I don't think it's a particularly well directed show.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of like. It's probably better animated in a lot of ways than G Gundam was. Just
I would say,
it has
in
better,
terms of like what it feels like production value in terms of animation. Yeah.
But I don't think it has the directorial. I don't think it's as well storyboarded. All of those things.
Yeah, there are no like sequence of shots in Gundam Wing that I think have the kind of power that, you know, the Death of Master Asia has in G Gundam. Right. Even if a lot of, particularly once you get some of those last couple of episodes of Gundam Wing where they really put their budget into it, like it produces some incredible animation.
Yes,
but usually it's not to a huge effect in terms of the storytelling.
Right. Exactly. So. That's, you know, one of the big differences, and it's something that takes a while to like this is a show that if you just watch the first episode, it has a very memorable moment at the end, which we'll talk about, but it doesn't really tell you anything about the direction of the show. You have to watch like 4 or 5 to start to get a feel for, okay, what's this show about? Which the only other Gundam I would say is vaguely like that is Zeta.
And but even Zeta, it's not that extreme. Like you can definitely, because Zeta does a better job of focusing on, even if you're maybe a little bit lost on what the bigger political picture is, you always have Camille to recenter yourself on, because he's a very clear protagonist that goes through very clear changes and growth over the course of the show. Yeah, the first episode of Zeta doesn't establish a lot about the plot, but it establishes Camille and Char and where they're going and how they're going to bump into each other. And that's like the key to that show. So, yeah. So that's, and I think what's interesting is that a lot of those structural things produce interesting stuff in Gundam Wing, and a lot of them produce very bad stuff in Gundam Wing. I don't think any of them are inherently couldn't make a good show. Like, I think the 5 Gundam highlight, there's a lot of good ideas here, and I think in the first half it creates some good stuff, but overall I would say it feels like a failed experiment by the end. Yeah, and the thing that was very interesting to me upon rewatching it with context I have now that I didn't when I first watched it is how much it feels like Game of Thrones in those moments, in good ways and bad ways, because Game of Thrones is another like very notable TV show that I think has that structure where it is way more about the larger political machinations, and you have individual characters that you can care about and root for, but the role that those characters play in the larger plot is less like they are moving the plot, and it's more they're being moved by the plot because it exists on a power level that they're not at, right? Like, they don't have the influence or power to affect the political situation they're in a significant way, and so they are pushed by the unseen forces. And when that works really well in Game of Thrones, it's awesome. When it doesn't work well in Game of Thrones, it makes a show that can feel like incoherent and annoying.
Yes, and slow and plotting and all those things. And I think the Game of Thrones comparison was something I made on Twitter, just trying to rationalize okay, this doesn't it's got a lot of the hallmarks of Gundam, but it doesn't really feel much like Gundam to me. Even if Mobile Fighter G Gundam is so different, there's things about it that make it feel very Gundam to me. Mm-hmm. And this one, it's more the aesthetics feel very Gundam and the storytelling doesn't, if that makes sense.
I agree.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, where do we want to go with it? I mean, I feel like this is not a show we need to do the episode by episode breakdown or anything like we did with G Gundam.
I agree.
Because a lot of it is just a muddle. Mm-hmm. Do you want to just take different areas of... Do you want to talk a little bit about just how it's set up at the beginning?
Yeah, so, because that is what's interesting about the show, even if it doesn't, I think, pull this off. The idea of let's have 5 different Gundam pilots that are working independently of one another for most of the show, and zoom in on them for different sections of each episode, and then having what feels like the initial setup is supposed to be, and the show never really actually does this, is have Relina as a sort of central character, and then as your kind of audience proxy a little bit, because she is not some weird traumatized child soldier that is on a super secret mission. She is a very rich, she's not necessarily totally relatable to all of us based on her elevated position in society, but she's a relatively just normal person trying to make her way in the world that you can relate your emotions to.
The first episode, and this is actually this is where I get frustrated because I think it's such a good idea, is that it splits the typical Tomino protagonist in half. And it takes sort of the Amuro and Fraubo characters and combines and then splits them in a weird way, right? So the Tomino protagonist in all of his shows and movies, the main pilot is also your audience proxy. You know, Amuro, you can't necessarily relate to him getting in a Gundam and fighting, but you can relate to him being a weird kind of nerdy kid who doesn't have a lot of friends, and then he goes on a fantastical adventure. It's the Luke Skywalker thing, right? And that's how most of the Tomino protagonists are structured. Like Judo being probably on the most relatable side, Camille being on maybe a slightly less relatable side, but they're all in that spectrum.
Yes.
And then this show, Hiro Yui is not an audience proxy because he's there's even implications in the first half that he's like a cybernetic being or something.
That's one of the things I talk about that, they never bring up again, because when Sally Poe analyzes him when he's on that medical bed, there's a strong implication that he has been modified physically in some way. She says
this isn't human DNA. It's really direct. And it would have to be because he has lethal injuries that he survives, which they don't really do with the other Gundam protagonists or the other Gundam pilots. So anyway, if you're Yui, not an audience proxy, but he is the pilot he's the most prominent pilot. Hikaru, this is interesting. This is the first Gundam show where no one actor appears in every episode, but Hikaru Midorikawa is in it the most by far. So you have him, but he's not your audience proxy. Relina is 100% your audience proxy because of how we meet her. She's in school. She's a little elevated, yes, but we're introduced to her as our POV. We meet Hiro through her eyes. She's very obviously the audience proxy, and because of kind of her role as meeting everything, she runs into all the big things in the early episodes, she's very heavily established as the protagonist. And I think my biggest frustration with Gundam Wing, if I pointed to one structural thing that I think kills the show, is after it's around the time when Zex and Hiro have their big showdown in Antarctica, Relina drops out of the show for 10 to 15 episodes. I forget how long it is, but it's a long gap. And that's when they go to space. I think the show becomes supremely aimless because it has no center anymore. And when she comes back, she's had her brain carved out and lobotomized, and she's an idiot now. And she's prominent from that point on, but she's not your protagonist. Hiro is sort of recentered as your protagonist, and even then he's not in every episode. Yeah. He's more like Tyrion in Season 2 of Game of Thrones. He's the closest thing we have, but he's still not really our protagonist. And it doesn't work. Relina was, I think, a really good setup, and I think that idea of you have the boy and the girl is supporting the boy, but now instead of it being the boy is your audience proxy and pilot and the girl is his friend, it's the girl is our protagonist and audience proxy and the boy is the pilot, but she's the bigger political mover. That's a great setup for a show.
Absolutely, yes. And it is the thing where, like, it's so clear to me. I have such a clear vision of a modified Gundam Wing that has Relina as the protagonist, which works really well and plays into some of the strengths of Gundam Wing. And to talk about it, I have to talk a little bit about like the character design and part of the fan base of Gundam Wing, particularly in Japan. Gundam Wing is the first in one of a series of Gundam shows that has a very notable female fan base in the Japanese fandom. And like this is very clear if you look at the 40-year anniversary big poll they did for Gundam, where it's just like this massive poll they did in Japan. It's like, what's your favorite character in Gundam, your favorite show, so on and so forth, like a bunch of different things. And you could look at and break down the demographics. And Gundam Wing, and the Gundam Wing, Gundam Seed, Double O Gundam, and Iron Blooded Orphans, all of those shows have about 50% of the people that participated in the poll were women. And most of the other shows, it was like 75% or the more participants were men. So it is a show that has a very clear female fan base, at least in Japan. I don't know if those demographics translate over here because it doesn't feel like it does, but it might. But a large part of that is the aesthetics of Gundam Wing borrow heavily from Bishonen character design, with Bishonen like literally meaning pretty boy. So it is pulling different design elements for the 5 Gundam protagonists and Miliardo. And I guess Trey's kind of, but he's like weird. And to make them attractive to a female, to what is a presumed female Japanese audience, and kind of build them out that way. And it was a pretty popular character design archetype in the mid-90s when the show was made. And I wish that they had honestly leaned into that more, because if you did, the setup is there to have Relina be the protagonist of what would effectively be like, it makes me think of the genre of games called otome games, which is basically dating sims, but with a female protagonist and for a female audience, like, and a selection of different male love interests that you get to choose between and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of the setup of Gundam Wing evokes that kind of dynamic, whether it's the game or like animes based on the game. That I've seen a couple of animes based on otome games, that it has this like clear harem kind of setup with her that's like, hey, here's Hero, there's the story arc where she meets Hero, and her influence with Hero, she's this like dejected, very stoic, standoffish kind of figure, but slowly through proximity and her just good-sweeted, kind-hearted nature, she kind of shows him the beauty of humanity and what kindness is, and gets him to open up. And there's a lot of those potentials of character pairings between Relina and the other Gundam pilots that if you only watch like the first 5 or so episodes, kind of feels like Gundam Wing is heading towards. And it very much never does that. Relina is paired with Hero very specifically for the whole show. And she has minimal interactions with a couple of the other Gundam pilots. I don't think she ever even meets Wu Fei. No. Because Wu Fei is an unnecessary character that probably should have just been cut at some point.
Yeah, and they do wind up doing that arc with the other 4 Gundam pilots. Not Wu Fei, because he doesn't matter. But like the other 3, I should say, all have some kind of interaction with another person, often a woman who like brings them towards their humanity more.
Yeah.
Like Troa probably, I think, has it the best with Catherine and the circus, which I thought was goofy at first, and then I grew to actually love that as a corner of the Gundam Wing world.
And then they very haphazardly gin up a love interest for Duo that in a way that feels very weird to me.
Yeah, but like Duo is the most human of them to begin with, so like it's kind of okay. And then Hero in the series proper, they never really do it, and it's one of the weird holes in Gundam Wing is that it never feels like Hero gets to learn to be a real boy, and it really kind of feels like the end of the show should be him dying, a la the end of Char's counterattack, but it's not. And then I do think they do it better in Endless Waltz.
Oh, definitely.
But
it's a bit like too late.
It's a little It works in the context of that movie, but it like doesn't like save the show. It is a weird thing that even though they pair her with Relina, I mean, he's still trying to kill her like 5 episodes from the end. It's so stupid.
Yeah, because it is, and it just feels like they never double down on some sort of character or like relation dynamic between the two outside of something that I think is like basically if you want to do a Gundam Wing drinking game, is every time Relina is staring out a window and quietly whispers, Hero, and then cut to Hero in his Gundam like staring out saying, Irina. And that's basically their entire character relationship is just based on them saying each other's names. And that's
Sean,
it.
you're going to get us fucking sued. That's a drinking game that will destroy your liver.
Oh, yeah.
Because this is in that genre of anime where people stare out windows and say each other's names.
Yeah, but never actually have a conversation with one another. And that's the thing that's so annoying about the relationship, because I think you could very easily build a romantic relationship between those two characters that would feel satisfying and would serve as a defective cornerstone for the show. There are lots of other shows that do literally exactly that. It is a trope in this kind of fiction, but they just never do it because they never have the characters have a real heart-to-heart, and it's just baffling.
It's something that there are a lot of things about this in Gundam Wing, but this is one that makes me like G Gundam just even more than I already did.
Yeah.
Is contrast that with the two main characters in Gundam Wing, Rain and
Domon?
No, Domon, yeah, sorry. I was thinking Duo because I got the D in my head. But anyway, with Domon and Rain, and like, we already thought they did that fantastically, and it's even better when you look at it in context that these shows were made back to back, and it's like, it's a fucking night and day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it is just, and it was down to, even in Endless Waltz, I lost my shit when you have another Didina. Hero! Like, because Relina has three ways that she says hero. She either says it quietly under her breath while she's staring wistfully out a window. She says it in shock and surprise when he appears all of a sudden, and sometimes he's just pointing a gun at her from the balconies after he's promised for the third time to kill her. Or she says it with like this like joy of, oh, he's here, Hiro. And that's it. Or no, sorry, there's a fourth one, which is when other characters are talking about Hiro in a scene, and she says his name with a question mark, Hiro? Yeah. And that's it. And that's like, for the bad stretch of the show, it feels like that's like 70% of her dialogue, and it kills me.
It's if you did the master cut of it, it would be about a quarter of the length of the actual show, Gundam Wing.
Yeah, it's really infuriating, because it just feels like a dynamic that you can see how it could work, and they really never commit to it. But of course, if we're talking about Hiro and Relina, we have to talk about what in my opinion, is the most iconic scene in all of Gundam Wing.
It's the best scene in the TV show.
Yeah. But it's I would probably agree, but it is also a scene that, to me, spells the death for Hiro Yui as a character, because especially on rewatching it, it made me realize that from the jump, they don't understand what to do with Hiro. And this is the end of episode 1. You have the scene where Hiro has crash landed on Earth. For mysterious reasons, he's going to participate in some sort of Operation Meteor or something, but he's crash landed on Earth with the Gundam Wing, and then he somehow has infiltrated the prestigious academy that Relina is a part of, because she saw Hiro, because immediately after Hiro lands on Earth, he gets discovered, because he gets shot down, he then gets discovered by Relina, he tries to kill himself, fails to kill himself, and then runs away, which already sets you up for how much of a fuck-up Hiro Yui is, because he fails at everything he does. But then somehow he infiltrates the academy that Relina is at. Again, setting up a much better TV show, something like Full Metal Panic, which is another mecha show that is about a romance between the mecha pilot and a lady. But in that show, it is about the mecha pilot also being a transfer student at her school, and he becomes her bodyguard and all this stuff. And that's kind of what it feels like Gundam Wing is going to set up at the end of episode 1 with Hiro at the school with Relina. But that is a dynamic that manifests periodically in the first few episodes and then disappears almost entirely until Hiro delivers his beautiful thesis at the midpoint of the show, in space at another school that he mysteriously infiltrates. But so he's in Relina's academy, and then she goes up to him while they're on like the rooftop or whatever, and hands him an invitation to her birthday party, and he takes it, rips it in half in front of her face, and she goes, but why? Tearing up. And then Hiro puts a finger under the tear, wipes the tear away in a dramatic motion, leans into her ear and says, I'm going to kill you. And then walks away, and that is the end of the episode.
It's such a good hook. I can tell where you're going to go with it, but I just have to say, like, me watching it the first time, I don't know what's coming next.
Yes.
That is, because the first episode is pretty great. Like I say, it moves, it's got a lot of plot, it's good. And that moment, like, it's so dramatic. It's I think easily the best directed scene in the series, because I just remember all of it. You know, It's like it's got so much intention behind it, like the wiping the tear away, and then moving, and like that's such a dramatic moment. And I didn't know is this just because she saw him? She's the daughter of this Dorlian guy.
Yeah.
Is this like a political like? There's so many possibilities there. In the back of my head, I'm like, okay, this is going to be the arc of the show. It's kind of a Beauty and the Beast thing, and he's got this like violent impulse towards her, but they're going to become friends, and like that's going to be he'll have started from this place, and that'll be the dramatic turn. There's all these possibilities, and instead, he threatens to kill her like 7 more times, never does it. Threatens to kill other people 7 other times, never does it. And then fires a gun at the end of the last episode, and it's the one useful thing he does. Like it's, I don't know, it feels like the hook to a much better show.
Yeah, and for me, the most of it is really good. There's one part of it that I think ruins it. Or it doesn't, like, the scene in the context of the first episode is fine. In the context of where the rest of the show goes, it is a thing that, to me, is the harbinger of doom for Hiro Yui as an interesting, compelling main character, which is the wiping away the tear. Because that feels so out of character for when you know more about who Hiro Yui is as a person. He would never do that. Like, why? Like, what is this big, flashy, I'm going to wipe away the tear and all that shit? Like, Hiro Yui is supposed to be this, like, emotionless, robot-style assassin, like, child soldier who has been trained from a young age and maybe genetically modified or something to make him the perfect soldier. And he's supposed to be like a weapon, and you point him in a direction and fire. And specifically, that's very much what he's supposed to be at the beginning of the show before he presumably is meant to go over some kind of character growth, right? Like, that's not like a super original character setup, but it is a solid character archetype that makes sense in the genre that, you know, you can do a lot of interesting stuff with. But that character archetype doesn't do the dramatic wipe away the tear like he's like seducing her or something. Like, that's there to make Hiro Yui seem cool. And the last thing you want to do is make Hiro Yui seem cool because he's a fucking loser. He sucks. And not just in that, like, I kind of hate him because he's a terrible protagonist character and it's annoying to have him in the show so much because they just don't really develop him. But the show is supposed to be critical of the person that Hiro Yui is. They're not supposed to fawn over Hiro Yui every single second. And that, to me, is like the defining mistake that Gundam Wing makes from the very beginning that it never really figures out, which is that Hiro Yui, as we meet him at the beginning of the series, is a character that you're kind of supposed to despise in many ways and understand, or at least, like, maybe you're supposed to be attracted to him in some ways, but also understand that he's a dangerous, damaged person that is a bad person that needs to work to be a better person. And the show never really gets around to that idea, and every opportunity it gets, it has characters talk about how amazing Hiro is. Like other Gundam protagonists or other Gundam pilots, other characters like Sally Popo or Noin, Relina, constantly, Trays, Zex, everybody in this show, whenever they talk about Hiro Yui, only talks about how cool and amazing he is as a young Gundam pilot and how we need to aspire to be like this guy and do what this guy does. And these Gundam pilots, and Hiro Yui especially, will show us the way. And at the end of the show, we get fucking Quattro saying that Hiro Yui is the heart of space.
Yes.
It's like, he's an idiot, fuck-up 14-year-old boy that is emotionally traumatized and ruins every single thing he tries to do. And the show has a brief moment that we'll talk about after he assassinates the people trying to create peace early on, where it feels like they're almost on the path to recognizing that, and then they immediately reverse it once he goes to Antarctica. Yeah. And so it is this character that's like one of the main things that Tomino, I think, does really well in his shows is he understands that, like, you should have a sort of a messy relationship with the protagonist character. Like, you're not supposed to just think that Amuro is an amazing guy or that Camille is just perfect. And especially, not just the audience is supposed to think that, other characters aren't supposed to think that. You should have characters in your show that think that the protagonist of that show fucking sucks. That he's an asshole, that he's an idiot, that he's a terrible person. Like, at the very least, the antagonist should think that if nobody else in the show thinks that.
Yes.
Right? And you should have people like Bright Noah slapping Amuro in the face and telling him how much he sucks and he's a crybaby and get that goddamn Gundam, you idiot. Like, you need those characters to create space for your protagonist to grow and for you to have an interesting relationship with the protagonist character. And Gundam Wing is not interested in doing that.
No, and it is because there's so many places where they can do it, where the ramp is there to take, and they just keep. And I think you're totally right about all of this. And I hadn't thought about the wiping away the tear as like the key moment, but I think you're very right. It is this synecdoche for the larger problems with Hiro Yui, which, you know, I've mentioned several times, like Endless Waltz at least finally does the thing of giving him interiority and this pain and this guilt of something objectively bad that he did, and he knows it's bad, which means we're supposed to know it's bad, and he's trying to atone for, and he reaches some kind of like revelation in himself by the end. And like, no, it's not enough to fix the whole series, but it makes Endless Waltz much more compelling than anything else in the series for me, because the character at the heart of it is dealing with shit that we know Hiro would be dealing with, but the show is weirdly reluctant to grapple with, you know? And because there are so many moments. There's the end of episode 1. In episode 2, he fucking gets shot by Duo, who is like the nice guy of the group, and like gets this, and he's like, "Why are you pointing a gun at a defenseless girl, you monster?" You know, and there's the part where he kills all the people on the plane. There's so many places where you could do it, and they always kind of take the off ramp. Yeah, and or don't take the off ramp, however you want to go with the metaphor. But it leaves Hiro Yui being a character who isn't inherently awful. It's a good character design. It's a good vocal. You've got fucking Hikaru Midorikawa. Yeah. You're not going to get a bigger heavy hitter than that. He, I think, gives the character probably more depth than he deserves in the vocal performance. But, man, they just never make him into something.
Yeah, and it is one of those where I feel like I think this is like maybe the biggest casualty that happens as a result of the choice to have the self-destruct happen in episode 10. One is that Hiro fucking survives that at all. Yeah. Is just ridiculous. Like, there's no way of looking at that animation, because I remembered that he self-destructed the Gundam. I didn't remember that he was literally standing on it when it exploded. In my head, he like swings away or something and then gets hit by the aftershocks of the explosion. He's literally standing on the fucking thing as it explodes like a nuclear bomb. And
it makes him invincible.
And so it makes him just like feel like, well, there's no way for this character to be in any real sense of danger or threat. But immediately following that, there's an interesting period. There's the interesting period of Hiro Yui in the show where he's going around and trying to make amends for.
I really like those episodes.
Yeah, because he has murdered the people on Earth that are trying to that seem like they're getting very close to establishing some sort of peace between Earth and the colonies and the different nations on Earth. And Hiro fucks up. He's tricked by Treize, kills them. He realizes, like, oh god, what have I done? Then he blows up the Gundam Wing, and then he's going around with Troa trying to make amends. They still fuck it up a little bit, because this is another section where then they're cutting to Troa, as Troa's like in his internal monologue is just going on and on about how, man, Hiro Yui, what an amazing person this is. Like, he, you know, when he decides to do something, he just goes and does it as thoroughly as he can. And that's just the kind of guy that Hiro Yui is. And it's just like, shut the fuck up. Stop fawning over this character who has just done something that has like set your entire mission back so much that maybe has made the whole thing you're trying to do completely impossible, and you're still sitting in this car thinking about how fucking cool he is. Please stop doing that.
Because otherwise, I really like this period, because the episode, probably maybe the best individual episode of Gundam Wing, is the one where Hiro blows up the ship, because that's the episode where Oz reveals their master plan and takes over the Alliance. And it's just it's one of the only episodes I remember as a concrete episode, like a discrete unit, because it's such a good like master plan reveal. The Gundam pilots are tricked, they're laid low. It's like the second act of a story. You know, Oz has now taken over more than we ever thought possible, and now the Gundams are all hated by the colonies and the Earth, and they have nowhere to go. The problem is that winds up being the rest of the fucking show, and they never move into like a good third act. But in the moment, it feels compelling, and you have good stories, I think, with all the Gundam protagonists, and Heroes is actually compelling for a little bit, and yeah, but...
And then, out of nowhere, Noin shows up in a hangar, and somehow knows where Hiro and Troa are, and says, hey Hiro, Zex is in Antarctica, he has rebuilt the Gundam Wing, and he wants to fight you. And what does Hiro Yui do? He goes, yeah, okay. And he goes to Antarctica to get into the Gundam Wing and fight Zex for no discernible reason, and feels, again, the exact opposite of like what the character growth he's been on. It feels like Hiro Yui should be like, no, I'm not going to get back in the Gundam, because the last time I was in a Gundam, I fucked everything up. It's so irreparably. And there's no internal monologue. There's no struggle. There's no like sense that Hiro's trying to make some sort of big choice. Even though this is a massive turning point for the character, actually. It feels like the show doesn't realize that. And he just ends up being like, yeah, I'm going to go get in the Gundam Wing. And then Hiro Yui is like a totally static character from that point till the rest of the show.
Because the other thing, it's not just about whether or not he's going to get in the Gundam. It's about Hiro turning from a passive to an active character.
Yeah.
Because the Hiro we meet is a very passive character. He receives orders, and he goes and does it.
Yeah.
And he is moved by other forces. He is just a blunt instrument.
It's basically his catchphrase is mission accepted for the for almost the whole show until he goes mission accomplished at the end.
Which is a good moment, but still. So exactly. And so he's very passive. He's a blunt instrument. That moment with the big ship he blows up, the plane he blows up, should be the moment that, and it does for a little while, shake him out of that and being like, shit, being a passive blunt instrument is bad and I don't like how it makes me feel. He is then an active character for a couple episodes because he is choosing where to go. He's got Tro along with him. He's making decisions. And then Zex comes in and is like, you want a Gundam? And he's like, okay. And then he's passive for the rest of the show.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing that the back half, particularly of Gundam Wing, is so frustrating, is that no one... They're just all being buffeted by bigger wins and not making any decisions for themselves, which is... just so bad for a piece of what should be like naval space fiction. You just can't do that. Mm-hmm. But whatever. It's even if you take like Tomino out of the equation and slot in like Star Trek or something. No, it doesn't hold up. This is not how you do this, right?
Yeah, and it just ends up making Hiro just so dull as a protagonist character. And then this is around the time where it starts feeling like he gets recentered as the main protagonist of the different Gundam pilots.
Because this is around the time when Relina starts appearing less, and then when they go to space, she's gone for a huge stretch of the show.
Yeah, exactly. And that to me is like Hiro Yui in a nutshell on this show. Is like him early on. They're like, you see the little pieces of where it could get better, but then they give into their worst instincts and they keep him this very static character and just have other characters constantly tell us how cool he is and how good he is. Which there's, at least for me personally, and this is partially a personal taste thing, there's nothing you can do to make me dislike a character more than have every other character in the thing tell me how cool they are.
Oh, yeah. That's a bad thing.
Yeah, it just immediately, it only works for, I think, like, younger viewers. And I can see if you're, like, 13 buying into it because everybody in the show is telling you how cool Hiro is, so he's got to be cool. Like, he really pulls off that green... wife beater that he's wearing all the time. Cool.
Yeah, like if the opening arc of Dragon Ball was they cut away for 5 minutes in every episode so Oolong and Bulma could talk about how cool Goku is and like he's the best kid. Like
it's like he's just so amazing. He's got such a pure heart. But he's so strong, but he only ever uses his power for good. Man, I wish I could be like Son Goku.
Yeah, that would suck. Because one, it not only robs Goku of... It robs you of a show not tell dynamic, because it would rob you of Goku getting to demonstrate why he's a cool character. It would rob you of all those other characters like Oolong and Bulma getting to be their own characters, which is what happens on Gundam Wing. Because I actually think Troa, I realized, especially watching Endless Waltz, how much I like Troa.
I love Troa.
But Troa, so much of him is wasted on talking about how cool Hiro is, and that's all time that could be spent either showing us how cool Hiro is or having Troa develop as his own character. And everybody falls into this at some point, but I feel like Troa is a real victim of that in several parts of the show.
Yeah, I agree. Do we have anything else to say on the Hero train for now?
No, I mean, I do want to say that, like, I want to talk a little bit about some of the structural things in the show, because other characters will come into this, but, like, it's something, because while we're at the beginning, one thing that makes the beginning solid also is that it has a pretty clear structure, which is that the Gundam pilots are fighting against Oz, which is this paramilitary inside of the Alliance that is trying to basically take over the Alliance, and the Gundam pilots are doing that. And it takes a little while to piece the plot together, but you get it. It's fairly direct. It's more complex than, like, original Gundam, but it's more on the level of, like, Zeta or something.
Yeah, it's probably not quite, because Zeta also has... Zeta is inherently more complicated because it's building off of a previous series.
Yes. But, like, that works, and I think it's good, and it builds to this climax around episode 10 where Oz takes over everything, and it's, okay, this is an interesting turning point. The problem is, once they make that move, the show gets so obsessed with status quo shifts. And it's something that, when we talk about the other characters, this is just going to come up, because the show from that point on, its main source of narrative momentum is switching up the status quo. And it doesn't actually feel like momentum because it isn't, because it's not motivated by things characters are doing. It's just the status quo is changing. And especially at the midpoint when clearly the story has just gone out the window and they're improvising. It's like every other episode, there's a new faction, or a faction has changed its name, or it's gotten a new leader, or someone has switched sides. You know, fucking Zex goes from fighting against the colonies, for fighting against Earth, like all these different crazy things that happen. And it gets fucking exhausting. And by the time the show is wrapping up, you forget that this started with Oz and the Alliance.
Yeah.
Like, because they're just fucking irrelevant. Trey's, it makes no sense as a character. Like, there's so many things about that. And it's why the initial part of Gundam Wing I remember the most fondly, because it's the only part with, like, a solid status quo that is explored and you come to understand, and it seems like there's some kind of grounded reality about it. And even that period after Oz takes over, I said this to you off the air once, that, like, this actually feels like an interesting show to watch right now, because the whole idea of this paramilitary group taking over from within and using propaganda and, like, promising people favors to get them to like them, that's actually, and if the whole show was about that, that's an interesting political dynamic to explore, because it's a very real world thing. But those things go out the window because they never stick with one status quo long enough, and they wind up giving us like 37 by the time the fucking show ends. And every character is a victim of that at some point or another.
Oh, absolutely. So I think it's probably just worth it to go through as best we can how this works, because it's the thing that makes, like, it's not even just the last half. It's like really like the last 2/3 of Gundam Wing very hard to piece together in my head. I've watched it twice. And the second time I watched it, I finished watching like 5 days ago. So, you know, it's very fresh for me. And I already have the experience of it. So, but it's still really hard to kind of put everything together. So you have on Earth, you have what is called the Alliance, which is basically just the Earth Federation government from original Mobile Suit Gundam. At some point before the show, the Alliance used military force to subjugate, it seems like, most of the other nations on Earth to join this alliance. One of the main ones being the Sank Kingdom, which is where Relina and Zack/Milliarda's originally from, in a Shar-esque background. That was a pacifist country that was taken over violently by the Earth Alliance. Around this time, also, you all have the colonies out in space. It's been 195 years since we had colonies, because this is after Colony 0195, as Solid Snake / Akio Utsuka tells us, / Relina's dad tells us in the narration at the beginning of each episode.
I do really like having Akio Utsuka do the narration.
So I find it funny that's like they do have him play Relina's dad for the first 5 episodes before that character gets killed. Yeah. It's just like, and then he's just your narrator. So it's like, is it supposed to be Relina's dad that's narrating the show? Or is Akio Utsuka playing a totally separate narrator character? It's just because it's not a different sounding voice. It's just Akio Utsuka doing a Solid Snake-esque voice for the whole thing.
I think it's probably they hired Akio Utsuka for the narrator, and when they had him in the booth, they're like, shit, we have this other voice. If you have Akio Utsuka, use him.
Yeah.
There you go.
Because it's fucking Akio Utsuka. But yeah, so it's after Colony 195. So it's 195 years since the colonies were a thing. And the colonies are nowhere near as well sort of like established as Universal Century Gundam, where you have the sides and all that stuff that like helps make it a lot clearer what the colonies are like as a political group. You just have this vague, like, there are colonies, and
I don't think they're ever even named.
No, because you have the one in Endless Waltz that has some, like, X1099 whatever, you know, it's just a ridiculous string of...
HHQQQ! They say it so many times.
And it's, yeah, so you have... So the ones you do get named are just confusing. And it seems like there's maybe 5 main colonies, one for each of our Gundam pilots, but that's just an assumption. Like, it's none of the colonies are made clear as like individual political entities. They're just always referred to as the colonies. But it's confusing because it feels like the setup with the Gundam pilots and having these different scientists like working independently to do this Operation Meteor. It feels like the colonies are supposed to be very distinct, separate, 5 distinct separate entities is what it feels like, but that never actually manifests in the show. So when the Earth Alliance took over Earth, and then they made sure that the colonies were separated, there was no communication between the colonies, so that way the colonies would not rebel. And that is what then gives rise to the colonies creating Operation Meteor, which let's not get into yet, who created Operation Meteor or what it is, because it changes like 3 times, and it feels like when it changes 3 times, it's not, we planned that ahead, it's, we have to now decide what to do with this Operation Meteor stuff, so let's come up with a different answer, because Endless Waltz's one is totally different. But basically, it's the colonies sending Gundams to Earth to fight the Earth Alliance to gain colony independence. It's never clear, because by the time it would be clear, it feels like so much about the show's direction has changed at that point that we don't know.
It's basically sending them down as guerrilla warriors to create, like, almost like terrorists to
yes,
like...
no, they are Gundam terrorists.
Yeah.
100%, yes.
Yeah. I mean, they're not terrorizing public spaces, but they're military occupations.
Yeah. And while all that has been happening, in the Earth Alliance, you have a group called the Specials, which were established by Treize Kushranada, and one of the main members being Zex Marquis, who's actually Milliarda Peacecraft, grown up in a very Char-like turn, and then Noin is one of them as well. The Specials then create Oz, but it seems like it's basically the same thing, and they never use the word Specials past like the first 4 episodes, so that term just kind of goes away. And Oz is clearly supposed to, in its inception, be the equivalent of the Titans from Zeta Gundam. That it's this special, like, subgroup within the Earth Alliance, military subgroup within the Earth Alliance, that is basically fascist, and they're trying to take over, and they're like this elitist group. Later on in the show, you come to discover that Oz is being backed by an organization called the Romefeller Foundation. That the Romefeller Foundation are the actual people pulling the strings behind Oz, and they kind of come into the scene once they are now trying to take over the Alliance in general, and then for most of the show, the Romefeller Foundation is actually controlling the Earth sphere, and whatever the main Romefeller dude is, who's like a totally unmemorable antagonist that is boring.
We should mention... Sorry.
Yeah, well, he's the one that's taking over. What are you going to say?
Well, we should also mention that Oz's goal, once they put their whole plan into action, seems to be... that, well, there's like Treize's stated like idealistic goal is to free all the colonies and to like create like less militarism through militarism. It's this weird like dichotomy.
Very anime.
Whereas Romefeller's is this like total control, and there's this tension that kind of evolves that feels like, again, it's kind of a retcon, but it's what they do of like Romefeller is the more fascistic arm of it. Oz's leadership under Treize is the more idealistic side, and that's part of why like Zex was there and all this stuff. But it also means that nothing makes sense because the Gundams were also fighting for the colonies, and already we've got sides mixed up.
Yes, and then the big episode 10 that we keep on talking about that has the turn where Hiro kills the Alliance members suing for like peace and sort of tranquility. That's... Again, it never kind of ever doubles back on, once you have a better sense of what the situation with the colonies is, on what that method of peace would have been. This is one thing that's really confusing about this show, is that it never feels like it does a good job of establishing exactly what its political situation is. And so there are gaps that you can kind of fill in for yourself that sound interesting. Because I think for a lot of the show, what it's like gesturing towards is this notion of that pacifism is something that actually leads to fascism taking over because you are not able to fight against it, and that there is like true peace, and then there is, which is not, I'm not saying true peace in the true pacifism, I mean like actual peace on Earth. That's one thing. Another thing is peace as attained by a militaristic faction enforcing peace on a population through force and pressure, right?
Yes.
And that seems to be the like one of the main tensions, is that the Romefeller Foundation is creating its own kind of peace, but to do that, it's enforcing that through violence, which is not actual peace, but it's using the symbols of like Relina to try to enforce that. And when the show is suggesting that kind of stuff vaguely in the second half, I think is when it hits some material that seems promising, but then it starts backing away from it very quickly. And it ends up boiling things down to this very anime, like cliche anime, very simplistic understanding of war and peace as like war is a thing that happens because people just like to fight. And so it's like Treize and Zex end up on opposite sides, with Treize getting ousted when he was leader of Oz and Romefeller Foundation takes over, and he's sort of put on the outskirts. Then he comes back in once Relina has taken over the Earth stuff from the Romefeller Foundation, and so really re-establishing a sort of Earth Alliance-esque kind of government structure that's no longer the Romefeller Foundation. But then Treize comes back in, and Relina just gives leadership over to Treize. Treize then goes to fight the colonies. While that is happening, Zex has gone to the colonies, and he has now become the leader of a terrorist/paramilitary group called the White Fang. that are not introduced until about the last 15 episodes of the show. And they apparently are the actual forces behind Operation Meteor. And they are this militaristic colony faction that is trying to both win independence for the colonies and seemingly destroy Earth at the same time for reasons they want to destroy Earth instead of just becoming independent and being equal. They just want to destroy Earth.
You know, it's like the American War of Independence when we decided not only are we going to declare independence from England, but we are going to wipe it off the map.
Yeah, that's basically what it sounds like, because it's a similar, like, the Earth people have so much more, have so many more resources, people, mobile suits, all that kind of stuff, that there's no realistic way for the colonies to win an all-out war with Earth. The most you could hope for is some sort of, like, equal independent relation where you are your own sovereign nation, recognized and sort of respected by the Earth sphere, which seems like what you'd want, but instead, like, no, because they have won. By that point, they have effectively won independence. The Rockefeller Foundation has lost. Relina has taken over. Relina is a nice, reasonable young lady who is very obsessed with total pacifism, so she's not going to fuck with the colonies deal, but Zex decides anyways, you know what, let's just try to destroy Earth. But it seems like really what their plan is that Zex and Treize both are operating towards the same ideal, which is to create a war that is so awful that the consequences of that war are going to be so severe that everybody's just going to be like, well, that war sucked so much, we're never going to have wars again, which is clearly what happened after World War II, because as we all know, World War II was the last armed conflict that the Earth ever saw because the consequences were so dire. And that's basically what the setup is and how the show ends. And one of the weird things is it kind of feels like the way the show ends ultimately proves that Treize and Zex are right, is kind of what it feels like it lands on at the end. But maybe Zex was a little bit overboard, but he was basically they were right about their ideas. Because it does this weird turn on them and makes them seem like they're heroic and kind of doing the right thing. But Zex is like just going a little bit too far. Got to pull that back a bit. But you're definitely right that if we just fight a really bad war, that war will be so bad that we won't have wars anymore, is kind of where it lands on.
I mean, it's why the U.S. famously brought down our military after Vietnam.
Yeah, exactly.
And we downsized, and we have a small, defense industry and not this massive imperialist factory.
Yeah, it's just, I'm so glad that wars used to suck so much that we just don't have them anymore. And it's not that the nature of armed conflict has just changed with technology. It's definitely that we just don't have wars anymore.
And you're not even doing every single faction on the fucking show.
No,
There's
that's
so many.
Yeah, that's the broad
yeah
picture. It's mostly Earth Alliance gives birth to Oz, which is backed by Rockefeller, which wins. But then the Sank Kingdom, the Relina faction, ultimately wins out. But then the White Fang tries to destroy them, and then the White Fang is defeated.
But then Relina also turns the Earth. She abolishes all national borders, which the show thinks... The show actually goes double down on that. It's like, that would be a good thing, and not this horrific act of fascism to abolish all national borders and have one queen of all humanity. Oh my god.
But it is Queen Relina.
It is Queen Relina.
Relina is my queen, so I'd follow her.
All right.
Yeah. So hopefully that clarifies what the show is doing with its politics.
It's so dumb.
Yeah, it's very dumb. But yeah, that's the mush in the second half.
Yes.
Is that switching between like Oz and the Rockefeller Foundation, and then their relationship to the Earth Alliance, and the Earth Alliance's relationship to individual nations like the Sank Kingdom.
Yeah, and then by the end,
from. And
then Treize by the end is calling himself the sovereign of the one world nation, which sounds like a fucking recording label.
Or like a cult.
Yeah, or a cult. And then you have White Fang led by Zex, and then you have the Gundams who are, and I think this is the biggest problem, never on anyone's team. Yes. At any point in the show, and by the end they're just kind of fighting everybody for fuck's sake, and it makes no sense. It's a big thing I think Gundam Wing is missing, is a Captain Bright. It needs somebody who is in charge of these young men, who is like giving them missions, outlining roles, like pointing them somewhere, because having a portion of the show, like after that episode 10 turning point where the Gundams aren't sure what to do or where they belong, that's interesting. That's a good second act turn. But like making that the whole show, which is what Gundam Wing ultimately is they're never on anyone's side. They never have orders. The 5 of them are only working together at the very end. The last 5 episodes is the first time they're all on a ship together.
Yep.
It's like, they took a lot of little things here and there from Tomino, but they didn't take this, like a key thing is that Tomino's works are naval military fiction, which is to say there is a ship that has a linear journey with a captain who is like leading things, and that gives it shape and structure. And Gundam Wing, at times wants to be, I think, naval space fiction, and at times it just wants to be sort of political Game of Thrones-esque space fantasy fiction kind of thing, and it never really reconciles the two.
Yeah, and it's very nearly unique in Gundam fiction for that, because other than obviously G Gundam, Build Fighters, those are weird outliers.
Right.
But in terms of like core, primary, like real robot style Gundam shows, almost every single Gundam show is centered around some sort of core ship that has a pilot or a captain, and then has like your Gundam Ace as your protagonist. Like that is after Gundam X does that. Turn A Gundam is a little bit more complicated, but still comes back to that a lot. Gundam Seed has it, Seed Destiny has it, Double Gundam has it, Iron Blood Orphans has it, Gundam Age has it. Almost every single AU show still adopts that structure, and Gundam Wing just like doesn't. But it feels like it was building to that, and I wonder if that's one of the things that happened in like the weird production mush behind the scenes, is that it does have the pieces to make that happen. It's got characters like Noin that are clearly set up to be a captain-like character that she sort of becomes a little bit by the end, but like still not really all the way there. You have Quattro clearly set up to be the leader of the Gundam pilots, but it takes Quattro so long to get into that role, and even when he gets into that role, it's so late and he's not really all the way there. That yeah, it would been much more interesting, I think, to have the second core, the second half of the show, be centered around here are all the Gundam pilots now together on one ship with a unified mission, in the way that like G Gundam has that clear differentiation between the first and second half. I think that for Gundam Wing would have worked really well.
Yes. Instead of the eternal mush.
Yes.
Which, I mean, really does, like, I made the Game of Thrones comparison, but also, like, throw a dart at a fucking Netflix drama. It feels like that. That, like, eternal middle that's, like, a lot of, like, middling without a direction, you know?
Yes.
Because it's just... I mean, and for Gundam Wing, this would be very little. It's fill the episode order, you know, and that's what it kind of feels like. Yeah. There's like this is the first Gundam show where I can point to episodes that I just like. This is just filler. This is just a filler episode. Yes. It wasn't based on a manga, but this is still a filler episode.
Yeah, it's them spinning their wheels because they don't know what to do with like the main plot.
So do you want to talk about the other characters? We did a bit on Hero. Now that we've talked about the whole setup of the world, do you want to come back to some of the other characters?
Yeah, so let's run down the different Gundam pilots. So we have so luckily we have all the Gundam pilots are numbered for us because all of them have numbers in the name. So Hero Yui is like Hitotsu, which is 1 in Japanese, and Yui also is Yuitsu. So he's like even in his name, Hero is the one and only. It's that there he is.
His name is full of puns. Yeah, it's literally the word hero. It's number 1. It's a whole bunch.
Yeah, so it's a lot. So then our number 2 pilot, my personal favorite, I think basically everybody's favorite, the pilot of the Gundam Death Scythe, which is the most 90s edge-ass Gundam name ever. I cannot tell you. So, you know, when I said earlier, I remember the moment when people started wearing Gundam Wing t-shirts at my elementary school. It was mostly boys wearing Death Scythe t-shirts because it's the Gundam Death Scythe. But this is Duo Maxwell, voiced by Toshihiko Seki, who I like a lot. He is Iruka Sensei from Naruto.
Who I mistook for the other Seki from G Gundam. Seki, who they don't sound alike, but I was very confused when I saw that in the credits, and then I was like, oh, it's the different Toshi, it's different last syllable.
Yes.
I mean, Duo, Duo is everyone's favorite. Duo should have been the protagonist of the show. Duo is like a good, well-rounded character who would also be fit to be a protagonist. And I think is the best balance of the show's tone, because yes, the Gundam Death Scythe and this boy who runs around calling himself a Shinigami is very 90s edge, but it's the right kind of 90s edge.
It puts a smile on my face whenever he says, I'm the god of death, or anyone says Gundam Death Scythe, or the upgraded version, which is the Gundam Death Scythe Hell.
Yes.
So good.
Because Duo also has kind of a wink about him as he does it. Mm-hmm. He is a little self-aware as a character. He does that. The Shinigami stuff is also because he's nervous out there flying around in a giant mobile suit, right? It feels a bit like a projection, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Which you don't get from Hero, you don't get from Troa, you don't get from Wu Fei. Quattro's a little different. Quattro's the most different of the 5. Yeah. But, Duo would have been a great protagonist for this show. And I even read the Wikipedia page. I have no idea if this is sourced. Is saying that they originally planned Duo being the protagonist and then they changed it to Hero. I have no idea if that's true. It sounds like something that could have been true because that character just feels more kind of fit for that.
Because he also features pretty heavily early on because he's paired with Hero in the first few episodes.
Yeah. But even, he's got some filler stuff. But I always enjoy Duo episodes and appearances just in that he's a fun character, and you can get a long way on a fun character. with one of the... I mean, I actually think all 5 of the Gundam Pilot's mobile suits are fucking great, but he's got definitely one of my favorites, especially with its redesign in Endless Waltz.
Yes.
Oh, good God. It's so good.
Yeah, and it's just, you gotta love a Gundam that just has a big beam scythe, and it can
So
fucking
good.
turn invisible, and the Hell version has, like, a big cloak thing that comes around like it's
Yep.
the Master Gundam. It's very good. Yeah, like, Duo ends up not, I feel like, having... I mean, this is true of almost all these characters. He doesn't have, like, a lot of, like, big story stuff with him. He feels mostly like the character that they put in with other characters to bring them around places, like, particularly... near the end, he keeps on having to be like, oh, I'm like the guy who gets the scientists and like brings them out and that kind of stuff. He gets captured like 500 times is another thing. He's like Doctor Who.
Yes.
It's just like down to he's the one who's also put into a prison cell in Endless Waltz. I feel like it's like a weird running gag that he's always in jail somewhere.
He is, but he's also very active. And, like, to be fair, all the other 4 Gundam pilots are much more active characters than Hero is. They're much less reactive. But, like, Duo's always kind of on the move. He's always doing stuff. When he gets captured, he has a plan to get out, you know? It's one of the reasons why I like... Not Wu Fei because he sucks, but the other 3 more than Hero is that they're usually scheming and coming up with stuff, and, they're very active.
Yeah, and then he has his girlfriend, whose name I can't remember, and this is a long list of characters. But that is one arc that I think, like, is weird, because I think it works when it happens in, like...
Hilda.
Yeah, Hilda, yes. It works when it happens in that episode, like the first episode she's introduced. I think the turn is really sudden, but that's pretty part of the course for Gundam Wing. What's very weird is, like... when in the second half, kind of like with Game of Thrones, when Game of Thrones gets bad, Gundam Wing leans really heavy on extraordinary coincidences. One of which being Duo and Hilda are just like together, even though it feels like there's no way those characters would have found each other again. They're just chilling on some colony somewhere, hanging out.
I'll say this in the defense. It's something that the reason why my 3 favorite characters on this show of the pilots are who they are, Troa, Quattro, and Duo, is that they all give them a little bit of a life outside of the Gundam.
Yeah.
And, I think they do it better for Quattro and for Troa. For Quattro, it's built in, because he has this whole family. He has the Magnaga Corps. What is it?
I don't remember.
Maganak Corps or something.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and he has this whole, like, extended family of people who are loyal to him, because apparently he's Arabic, even though he's white and blue-eyed and blonde-haired, and all of his servants are not, and it's a little uncomfortable. But he has this whole group, and then...
He's got his Fez family.
Yes.
All his friends who wear Fezes.
Troa has the circus, and he has Catherine, and that I think, actually, I really wound up liking that by the end of the show. And then Duo does have this, like I agree it's a little sloppy, but I just... All 5 of them needed it.
Yeah, it's better than not having it.
Yes.
You're 100% right. Like, it's better than Wu Fei and Hero that have almost none of that element at all. But it is definitely, like... It feels like it could have been much smoother how they transition that and have... But it's something that's hard to do, because when you have 5 different main characters you have to try to do that for, there's just not a lot of time to have the multiple episodes dedicated to that relationship between him and Hilda building up, and the turn... of her being like, I'm working for Oz and fighting for the colonies as a member of Oz. And then, like, 2 minutes later being like, because that's not even what that episode is about. That's the second half of that episode. Yes. The running problem in Gundam Wing. So it's in one half of one episode, she goes from that to being like, you know what, this Duo guy's got some smart things to say about colonies, and he's really hot, so let's switch sides.
Yeah. The reason it works with Troa is because they introduced the circus and Catherine in, like, his first appearance. Like, that is his original cover story, and so that's seeded through 50 episodes. And it gives plenty of time to, like, grow.
Yeah.
Even if, like, it's so silly on the surface, but it works. Anyway, we'll move on. But Duo also has a great moment when Troa has to destroy the Death Scythe in space, and Duo, like, falls to his knees, and it's a good moment.
That's a very good moment. So yeah, but then that does bring us to our number 3 pilot, which is Troa.
Troa Barton.
Trois, 3 in French, if you didn't catch that. So Troa Barton, which is not actually his real name. As we learned in Endless Waltz, his real name is No Name. He is a child soldier. Again, that's just established in Endless Waltz.
There is, in one of the mangas, they give him his actual real name, and I'm going to look it up because it's fucking funny, because it's like the same name but slightly different.
Yeah.
Anyway, you go on, but tell us about Troa.
So Troa, he's voiced by Shigeru Nakahata, which is probably best known for this podcast as the voice of Android 17 in Dragon Ball. Just very
That's where I recognized it. Yeah. Oh god, I recognized it the whole show, and I didn't look it up, but I should have looked it up, because that's so obvious.
Yes, it's Android 17. The very similar kind of like low-stated, quiet kind of performance. And yeah, Troa is definitely like... He is... similar to Hiro in like the stoicism, but he definitely has a lot more, I think, legitimate warmth and kindness to him, which is, I think, one of the reasons why I respond really well to him as a character. Is it just feels like, he doesn't say a lot, he seems a little bit emotionally stunted, but he is legitimately trying to do the right thing, and he has like morals, and it's not like Hiro's just, I'll accept a mission, I'm going to kill you. And then the only reason why Hiro doesn't repeatedly do like unforgivable atrocities across the whole show is that he's so bad at what he does that he can't actually commit the unforgivable atrocities he tries to commit. Troa wouldn't just try to commit them in the first place, which is why I like him.
I also think Troa does just a lot of cool shit. Like, I love the period in the middle of the show when he infiltrates Oz, for instance.
That's very good.
Like, again, we're talking about characters being active. Like, Troa's always kind of on the move. He has a plan. It's true in Endless Waltz, too.
Yeah, he does the same thing. He goes and infiltrates,
I like that he is, because he feels like a spy. Like, he feels like what Hiro Yui really should be, which is someone who is quiet and reserved, but has a lot of skills and puts a lot of thought, and like that's very obvious. Like Troa's stoicism doesn't feel like a character mistake that's boring. I think it takes a little while to warm up to him. It certainly did for me, but like over time you definitely get to like him. And I think there's something about having him always go back to that circus and having that be this recurring thing and be like real, like that movement from realizing this isn't just a cover. I think he likes these people. He likes this work. Like it's something that's genuine about him. That helps. That like makes him feel very human. I loved in Endless Waltz realizing that that's where he like really went back to and lived.
Yeah,
I love it. And his real name, by the way, in one of the manga, it is revealed to be Triton Bloom.
Yes, that's right.
So Troa Baten to Triton Bloom. I love that he just somehow still had the initials TB. Also, apparently, somewhere in the series, he goes by the alias Ralph Kurt, which is just a great fucking name.
Yeah. I mean, it should be noted that because Gundam Wing, I don't think Gundam Wing has like as big a fan base relative in Japan as it has in the West, but it's still one of the more popular Gundam shows, so it has a shit ton of manga spin-offs.
Yeah.
One of them being the aforementioned Gundam Episode 0, which does a lot of the backstory stuff. There's also a sequel called Frozen Teardrops, which is by the same writer, which has some wild stuff in it if you want to read that. And I believe in one of the manga spin-offs, it reveals that Troa is not just like in concept sort of like Catherine's younger brother, and he calls her Nason when he loses his memory and all that stuff. That he literally is her long lost brother that was lost and turned into a child soldier, which is a dumb thing that is in one of the manga that I'm glad that the show doesn't do.
That's incesty.
Yeah, it's dumb. It's but luckily it's not actually in the show. So.
Yeah, Frozen Teardrop is a novel that's never been translated officially, but there is a manga that's translated and is out here called Mobile Suit Gundam Wing Endless Waltz Glory of the Losers, which is sort of like the equivalent of the Gundam the Origin manga in that it retells the story with a bunch of new stuff in it. Yeah. And it's I think that I don't remember if that's written by the same people or not, but that's out in English. It's published by somebody here. It's not Viz. It's Vertical Comics, which is weird, but yes.
Yeah, and that's the one that also then uses the Endless Waltz designs for the mobile suits in that manga too, because I've seen some images from that because I really like the Gundam Wing Zero from Endless Waltz.
Yes, at one point maybe I'll read that because it looks kind of cool, but yes, it's out.
Yeah, so there's lots of spin-offs if you want to get some of that stuff. Some of them seem good. I've heard very mixed things about Frozen Teardrops, and some of the stuff that happens in it seems very dumb.
Yeah.
For instance, Hiro Yui and Relina are both cryogenically frozen. I think mostly because they had a very hard time of figuring out what does Hiro Yui look like as an adult, because he's such a nothing character that's very hard to extrapolate. So they just said, let's just literally freeze him in time so we don't have to worry about it.
Oh boy.
Yeah, but Troa, cool dude. Good at acrobatics. I really like his dumb like clown getup, and I especially like an Endless Waltz when it's the same clown getup, only he doesn't have a shirt on and he's fucking ripped.
Yes,
it's so good. It's just some good like you. This was when they knew that the show was really popular with its female audience, and so they could design some eye candy in there. Yes. And there's some very clear eye candy shots with ripped ass fucking shirtless Troa. That's very good. I appreciate it. Moving on to our number 4 pilot, it's Quattro Rhubarbo Winner, or as they say in Japanese, because I am a child and I find this pronunciation very funny, is Kataru de Baba Wina, which that Wina is the exact same way you pronounce wiener in Japanese.
We got that.
So yeah, so it's his name sounds like euphemism for dick. It's fine.
Kotoru Robara Rina is the best name in Gundam Wing. It's the closest to a Tomino name. It's very good.
It's very, very good, yeah. So Quattro, who is the only Gundam pilot voiced by a woman, he is voiced by Ai Odikasa, who we have heard before on Victory Gundam. She is Fala Griffin, the guillotine lady, which is
so weird.
Yeah, it's obviously a woman voicing a 30-year-old woman versus voicing a 14-year-old boy. The vocal performance is going to be very different, but it is very hard to tell.
Yes.
Because when I saw that in the credits and when I was looking up what she had done, I went and listened to clips back to back. Like, I just can't tell. That is like very impressive. Even like the voice actress for Naruto or stuff like that, if she's doing the boy voice or the girl voice, I can still kind of tell it's the same lady. Not with this performance. But yeah, so Quattro is definitely, for me, with Duo as the two Gundam protagonists that are like humans.
Yes.
And have like human feelings and express human feelings and do human type things. And Quattro is kind of interesting because I know that particularly in Japan, I think over here as well, he is by far the least popular of the 5 Gundam protagonists.
That's too bad.
Yeah, because he's like the responsible one that tries to get stuff done. But he's like, I think Quattro's like very close to being able to make the show work in a couple of places, and they just never actually do it. Like if they actually committed to him being able to bring the Gundam protagonists together earlier on and give them all direction, I think that and have that be a consistent thing rather than like every 10 episodes he's being like, let's go to space, guys, and they all go to space and then they break up.
Yes.
If that was they were together more and Quattro leading them, I think there would have been potential for that to work really well for the show.
I think Quattro's a really good character.
Yeah.
He's sweet, he's kind, I mean, he kills a lot of people, but he doesn't like to think about that too much.
But he says sorry as he does it. So it's
Yes.
like at least he's aware that killing people is bad, which I think he's the only Gundam protagonist that's in that, or the Gundam pilot that's in that space for this show.
Yeah, you know, he's got his cool, like, family of servants and people, and again, weird racial dynamics aside, I think he's... I don't know. He's a nice character. He's a fun character. He's got the most personality alongside Duo, and he's got some good story stuff in the show. I was ultimately disappointed in how kind of bland it turned out, but I do like right at the middle of the show. It's like this nice little injection of action into the show where he, after his dad dies, just decides to break bad. And he steals the Wing Zero, and he just goes crazy and starts blowing up colonies. And then you ultimately find out that the Wing Zero has a weird, like, Cyber New type thing in it. That,
Yeah,
like,
the
made
Zero
him,
system.
The Zero
that
system.
can predict the future or some shit, I guess.
And
Zero.
it made him go crazy. And it's kind of boring in the end. But I did like the 2 episodes when he, like, kind of became a bad guy, because that's a really interesting possible turn for that character, but they don't really commit to it.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of good stuff with him. I don't love some of the stuff near the end of the show with him, where he's weirdly paired with the worst character in the show, Dorothy, and has this fight where he gets stabbed and then lives, and I don't know. But his stuff in the movie is fucking great, because he does like the interstellar, like figuring out all the calculations for how to like get the ship around the sun, and that's fucking awesome. But we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. So yeah, it is. You're right. It is very funny that he's paired with Dorothy, because Dorothy's clearly a character they just didn't know what to do with outside of, we need like a bad Relina for like as a foil for Relina, and then they just didn't know what to do with the character past that like concept. Because they must have been at least in the same scene at some point, because they were both in the Sun Kingdom at the same time. But when they come together at the end, I was just feeling like, wait, how do you know her name? Like, how?
It's because there's a moment where it's the only other time he has a new typey flash is that the Zero system tells him, because Dorothy is controlling all the mobile dolls, and he gets this flash. He goes, Doroshi Catalonia, right? And then she goes, Katoru Rababa Wina.
Yeah.
And that's how they know each other. And then they have this fucking fencing fight, because they like to do the fencing scene from the end of the original Gundam. They do it like 5 times in this show. Yeah. And they always do the scene where someone stabs the helmet like Amuro does to Char. But anyway, yeah. Can I just say something about Dorothy? It's because Dorothy, there's almost nothing to say about her, so while we're on the subject...
No, we have to, because I feel like there's more to say about Dorothy.
Okay. I'll wait.
Yeah, because I feel like there's a whole... I feel like the female supporting characters we should just address as like a big clump, because I think the way this show uses its female characters as opposed to Tomino Gundam is kind of interesting. So that's Quattro. Then moving on to the fifth and last Gundam protagonist, Wu Fei, which I think Wu is 5 in Chinese, so Wu Fei Chang, or Chang Wu Fei, as they say in the show. Voiced by Ryuzo Ishino, who hasn't been in a lot of stuff, but I'm just going to show you, Jonathan, his picture, because this is 100% a picture of a man who voiced Wu Fei.
Yep.
That is like the hairstyle, everything. Like, you just look at that dude's picture, that's the guy who voiced Wu Fei. I feel like he just is, not in a bad way, I feel like he kind of is Wu Fei. He's got this like bad boy look to him. It's very good. Wu-Fei fucking sucks.
Wu-Fei sucks. I didn't think... There was a point in the show where I thought Wu-Fei was cooler than Hero, because at least he got to do some cool kind of martial artsy stuff, but he's worse than Hero. He never has any, like, semblance of an arc. He has... His last, like, 20 episodes are so fucking nonsensical, from his people blowing up their own colony, and then he reacts by deciding to just kill everyone fighting in space, but no one really ever shakes him out of that, to having this kind of inexplicable obsession with Treize, which I guess is supposed to be because he tried to kill Treize early in the show and failed. Wu-Fei sucks. Like, nothing ever comes out of that character. He is such a nothing. I think, like with everyone, I think Endless Waltz does better with him, and he gets like he basically becomes Rambo from First Blood, and I kind of like that. But in the main show, he sucks, even though he has one of the cooler Gundams.
Honestly, I'm not big on Wu-Fei's Gundam. I feel like...
I like the second version in the second half of the show, and especially in Endless Waltz.
Yeah.
But
I think of the 5, I think his is my least favorite.
That's
it's
fair.
Not bad, but...
That's fair.
Yeah.
I like it, but yeah, I don't know how I would rank them. But, there's some cool stuff it does.
Yeah, but Wu-Fei himself, he's just a very nothing character. The show is mostly structured around pairing two of the Gundam pilots together. So usually it's like Heroes with someone and Quattros with someone else, or Hero and Quattro together and Duo and Tro together. Like, it likes to do that. And then Wu-Fei is just this weird odd man out where they had 5 Gundam pilots, but 5's not evenly divisible by 2.
Yeah.
So he's just always the odd man out. And he has no real relationship with any of the other Gundam protagonists. He has almost no relationship with any of the supporting characters, only kind of Noin from the first appearance, because they're introduced in the same episode, and then kind of Sally Po, but really kind of.
Really kind of, because I think it's Wu-Fei, this is an early episode where he has, I think it's after that episode 10 point, and he feels he's failed and he doesn't want to fight anymore, and he meets Sally Po, who's like leading all the rebels in the jungle, right? That's the episode that has my favorite Wu-Fei moment. It's also the worst Wu-Fei moment, where they're begging him to fight because they're all being mowed down, and one guy is like just like drowning in a pool of his own blood, and he like grabs Wu-Fei by his lapels and is like, "Please, Wu-Fei, for me, like my dying wish, you have to save us." And then he dies, and then Sally comes over and is like, "Will you fight now?" And Wu-Fei's like, "No, I'm still not going to fight. I don't want to." And then another guy gets killed and is dying in a pool of his own blood, and grabs Wu-Fei by the lapels and goes, "Please, for my dying wish, will you fight for me?" And Wu-Fei's like, "Fine, I guess." And then he goes and fights. They have to repeat the scene twice to get Wu-Fei off his ass and in his Gundam.
Yeah, and then after that point, it's just Wu-Fei in space just going like, "I'm fighting my own justice.
Yeah.
I'm just going to kill everybody." And then, yes, in episode 8, he tries to assassinate Treize. He fails. And this is one thing I was surprised by on my rewatch. In my memory, that was a much more elaborate fight between Wu-Fei and Treize. It's like 5 seconds. It's the shortest, flimsiest thing. And I think because they build it up so much as like this obsession that Wu-Fei has, that in my memory, that must have been a bigger fight. And when you watch the show, it's like, this is barely even a thing.
But you say they build it up. What they do is that happens in episode 8, and then they don't mention it for 30 episodes, and then he starts to obsess over it. There's nothing in that intervening time. Yeah. It's like it comes out of so nowhere. I had forgotten and looked up that he had fought Treize. Like, that was just because it's such a nothing moment that he turns into this big thing that, again, Endless Waltz does something better with, but like in the show itself,
the Endless Waltz, I don't think fully is able to figure out how to make Wu-Fei work.
No. But whatever.
Yeah, that's Wu-Fei. He sucks. He's there. So then let's talk about some of I want to get through some of the supporting characters, because this show is interesting in that it still has this very Gundam quality to it. It has a lot of female supporting characters, and they're very diverse, except for you have almost no Mobile Suit pilots. You only have one in Noin, and even then she's not mainly a Mobile Suit pilot. She's kind of an extra Mobile Suit pilot. And I find that really interesting in Gundam Wing.
Well, it's something this whole period of Gundam is doing, because G Gundam only has one woman Mobile Suit. Like, Rain does it sometimes, but is not primarily. The only one who is primarily is, what's her name?
Alan B. Beardsley?
Yeah, Alan B. Beardsley, the best name in G Gundam.
Yes.
Is our only real, like, recurring female Mobile Suit pilot. Stardust Memory comes out at this period, and women are not allowed anywhere near a fucking Mobile Suit in that show, because that show is sexist as hell. And then Gundam Wing. So there's something like this period of 90s Gundam, and I wanted to ask you if it changes back.
I feel like there are a few more in After War Gundam X. There definitely are more in Turn A Gundam.
Because all of Tomino does plenty of that.
Turn A Gundam and G-Reco, very specifically, have a bunch. Actually, now that I think about it, I think C doesn't have that many. C Destiny has a few more.
Because it's something I don't like about this period, and I'll complain about it more going forward, is that the way Tomino sets up Gundam is it's not a world where, like, there are probably more men in the military, like there are in our real-world military, but, like, it's not weird for women to be mobile suit pilots. Like, there are more, I'm pretty goddamn sure there are more women flying mobile suits in Zeta than men. Like,
yes, at least in terms of, like, characters and not just, like, background people that get killed in half an episode.
So, like in Tomino Gundam, that's, like, never a distinction, really. It's, like, our main character is always a boy, but, like, women going around flying mobile suits is not a weird thing. It's not even a commented on thing. It's something that totally happens. Like, by the midpoint of the original, Sayla is out there doing just as much fighting as Amuro, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I find it weird that Gundam takes this step back and, like, really, like, diverges gender roles much more harshly. And I feel like, because Stardust Memory is before Gundam Wing, and this really recalls Stardust Memory for me in that way.
Yeah.
It doesn't go to the same abhorrently sexist place as Stardust Memory does in its final episodes, and that's why Gundam Wing is ultimately a better show. But, like, there's a similar attitude.
Yes.
That, like, the pilots are a boys' club, and the girls do other stuff, whether that's leadership roles or doing the, like, behind-the-scenes mech work or something, or political stuff, but they can't fight.
Yeah, and it's just weird and annoying, especially because you have 5 different Gundam pilots, and I don't know if this is real. I didn't, like, do a lot of sourcing on this one, but there are lots of rumors that one of the pilots was going to be a woman, and then it was replaced with Lu Fei. So it's like, great job on that. But yeah, it just is this feeling of, like, it's just is very notable to me. That's like, man, there's just almost no women piloting mobile suits again, other than Noin, and even then, they try to keep Noin out of the mobile suit basically as much as they can.
Yeah.
And part of that, I think, is also motivated by the fact that there are very few enemy pilots that are, like, notable characters. This is one of the big things that, like, Zeta and Double Zeta do in particular, and Victory Give, is, like, you have a huge cast of different antagonist-type characters that also get to be mobile suit pilots and captains of other ships and stuff like that you get to see this more kind of well-represented range of people. And in Gundam Wing, you just don't get that much. It's mostly just Zex and Treize. So, but you do have a couple of interesting female characters. So the aforementioned Sally Poe, I like a lot. I like Sally a lot. She's not used much in the show.
I love Sally. I said this on Twitter. I would totally watch an 8th MS team style OVA where Sally Poe is, like, going behind enemy lines to find the mobile suits.
Yes.
And, like, fix them up. That'd be fun. Sally Poe is cool. She's not used a bunch, but I like every one of her appearances.
Yeah, so Sally's great. I like Noin quite a bit as well. Lucrezia Noin, which is a good name.
Good name.
But then you have, I think, my favorite female character ultimately for at least the first half. I don't really love what they do with her in the second half, which is true of almost everybody. But Lady An, or Lady Un, however you want to say her name, she's so fucking cool. This is the lady that takes a man, throws a man out of the back of a plane that's up in the sky, and then shoots him in the head with a pistol as he's falling to his certain death to the ground. That is a lady after my own heart.
Lady Un is the character on this that feels the most like a Tomino character.
Yeah, I agree.
She feels like she could slot right in as a member of Zeon, or New Zeon, or New Zeon. They're mostly Zeons.
Yes.
But you know what I mean. Like, she could be...
like, I really want, like military hard-ass Lady On hanging out with Haman Karn. I really want that.
Oh, they would rule the fucking world.
Yes.
If she was Haman Karn's, like, right hand, like, pistol woman, you know, like, yeah, no, they would rule the fucking world. She's great, and you say second half. I mean, she's barely in it because she gets shot around the midpoint, and then we don't even find out she's alive until near the very end, and then she is kind of helping to run Treize's shit. And she's very different at that point. But, like, in that first half, especially, like, I love all the stuff where she also has this, like, split personality, and she's, like, kind of seducing the not sexually, but seducing the colonies to, like, come to Oz's side.
I like that better because when they first start doing that dynamic, it feels like she's pretending and putting it on, and then once it becomes a literal, like, oh, she has this weird split personality thing, that's dumb. But yeah, when she's like, puts her hair down and puts her makeup on and is trying to like play this very Relina-esque woman, like, I think that works really well, and then they kind of fuck it up. I
also love that her name is Lady On. She's not a lady. Like,
it's not a title. She's not royalty or something like that. She is Lady, like the given name Lady, surname On, Lady On.
Yep, and you have Treize just always calling her Lady.
Yes, my dear Lady.
It's great. It's great.
Yeah.
No, she's probably I agree. She's the most fun to watch. She feels like she kind of jumps off the screen more than a lot of the other characters in the show.
Yes.
And even, like, you know, if they had just left her dead at that point, it's actually a pretty good death because of how she, like, saves the Gundam protagonist and all this shit, and then she just, like, stares down her killer and gets shot. She goes out like a boss. It's good.
Yeah.
Anywho.
Now we have to talk about Dorothy, though. Dorothy Catalonia.
Who I was convinced when they introduced her that Oz's plan, or the Romefeller Foundation's plan, was to kidnap Relena and have Dorothy pretend to be Relena as like a false leader, because she looks identical to Relena. All they'd have to do is give her contacts to change the color of her eyes.
And like dye her hair brown.
Yeah, and she would be Relena. And I was like, that's why you introduced this character. That's why, like, that has to be what they're doing, right? They didn't know what they were doing. They had no idea what they were doing. She's a different character every time you see her. She has no... I mean, she fucking goes from her dad being a member of Romefeller who gets murdered to going and joining Zex and trying to destroy Earth. It makes no goddamn sense.
Yeah. One thing I will say in Dorothy's favor is, one, I do really like her voice. She's voiced by Naoko Matsui. It's just like good...
She's good.
Vocal quality. Dorothy also has killer fucking eyebrows. She has these weird, like... penguin eyebrows that like split in the middle, and it's so weird.
You're right. It's a good design.
Yeah, it's very good. It makes her stand out, and it's when Dorothy's introduced. I think like that early bit of the Saint Kingdom stuff is kind of interesting because the idea of this sort of like polar opposite of Relena, this other young woman who instead of being abhorred by war is like obsessed and seems to be kind of sexually aroused by war in a weird way. Like that's a cool dynamic. But it is just very evident that they didn't come up with anything for that character outside of that dynamic in her early appearances. But they have the character very kind of stubbornly recur throughout the entire show after her introduction. It just kind of feels like that's not necessary. It feels like Dorothy could be a character that's around for like 10 episodes, and then she dies or goes somewhere else, and you cut to her in like the last episode, and she's watching the fight on a TV and says, "Oh, those Gundam pilots, go for it," or whatever. You know, like it feels like that's the level of character she should be at. Instead, she becomes like weirdly, like really front and center in some of the last episodes of Gundam Wing. When, as you say, she pilots mentally the different mobile dolls for Zex, which seems like a weird choice because she has no military experience or background whatsoever. Have no idea what qualifies her to do that. But I mean that plan totally fails, so it makes sense.
It's because the last 10 episodes are just a big Char's counterattack riff.
Yes.
And I say riff, it's a ripoff. But like they put Dorothy in the role of what's her name? The girl in Char's counterattack.
Yeah, I can't remember her name, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, the main female protagonist in Char's counterattack. Like without like she and Zex don't have any kind of sexual tension, but like that's very clearly what it is. And then but she also doesn't die. Like there's a lot of characters in Gundam Wing who because of their archetype should die who don't die.
Yeah, because it's not a Tomino show, so they don't kill them. Yeah.
Yeah. So bad. I don't like Dorothy. She's weird. I like her.
Quest. That's the character's name.
Quest. Yeah. Yes. You know, I kind of like her appearance in Endless Waltz because it's one scene and it's actually kind of a good scene.
It's also very silly because she has that like giant gold bust show up behind her.
Oh yeah, but that's funny. But yeah. So I mean, like everything, I think it's better used in Endless Waltz. But yeah, Dorothy is the most inexplicable character in Gundam Wing.
Yeah, and then she I feels like Quattro's all of his stuff in the ending is just wasted on her because they have no relationship. And then they fence. And then you just have this weird like. Because when her grandfather gets killed, because she's the granddaughter, like grandniece, something like that, of the main Romefeller dude, and he gets killed and he goes into space by Zex. And then she's like, "Oh no, grandfather! Oh well, but at least he died a warrior's death." And then in the finale, you find out that like her father was a pilot that before the events of Gundam Wing was killed tragically in some sort of battle, and that's why she's obsessed with war. But not because she loves war, but because she wants the war to end in the same way that Treize and Zex do, just in like an awful big war. And the only way she can like feel good about her father's death is rationalizing it as a warrior's death is something that's noble. But then that's just bullshit. So she starts crying, and then Quattro says something that is one of many just like things that characters say that is demonstrably not true. Where he says, "You're kind. You might be kinder than any of us."
Yeah,
it's like. No, I mean you say the same shit about Hero Quattro. It's like kindness mean a different word in the AC 195 or something because these people are not kind people. They are very bad people.
Yeah, it's bizarre, and just the whole turn from her being with Romefeller to fighting for Zex, who is destroying what Romefeller had, which is Earth. there's a lot of people crossing lines in ways that make no sense in the end of the show.
Yeah.
But that's one of them. All right. Now do we get to talk about Zex and Treize?
Yeah, so let's talk about our antagonists, I guess is what they are.
But I don't know.
Yes.
I want to start with Treize.
Okay, yeah. Treize Kushranada.
I mean, I like the character design. I love the voice. I think it's actually
Yeah.
a really good vocal performance. But, good God, that character is so clearly set up as one kind of elevated villain, where like he's got his fucking mansion. I mean, he's like Garma Zabi. He's not Garma. What do I mean?
I think he is like Garma. I think one of the things with Gundam Wing is that they make Garma like the main villain instead of a better like Dozel Zabi or Giran. Yeah.
Yeah. I meant Giran, but like it's not even Giran. It's more like honestly like a male Haman Karn, where he's like hanging around his mansion. Yes. He's got his shirt off and he's swimming in one scene, and he's ordering these like horrific things. Like he's the guy who sets up the destruction of the peace plane. Even though his later motives make it seem like that's something he would never want to do.
Yeah, it's very confusing.
So, like, he's introduced as, like, the man behind the scenes pulling the strings, and that's one kind of villain. And he seems to work in that register, but then they very clearly make a decision at some point in the show of, like, they like this character and they want to make him more of an enduring character, so they change him completely. His motivations get a complete overhaul, and he becomes someone else entirely, and is still kind of a shadowy behind-the-scenes figure after he like quits Oz, but now with like a totally different set of much more noble goals. And by the end, like, it makes no sense for Wu Fei to kill him because he's completely on their side doing what they want. So like, there's Treize drives me crazy because he's a character with potential who makes no sense.
Yeah, and I think that's like kind of all there is honestly to say about him.
Yeah.
It's like, he has a lot of potential early on as a compelling antagonist, but they also don't have him in that mode for long enough for that to... Because he's the kind of antagonist that wouldn't come front and center until near the end of the show.
That's exactly how this... That's why I make like the Giran Zabi comparison or something, or Kaisila. Someone who you know is there, but we don't get to until the end.
Yes, and he's set up that way, but... They make that shift well before you'd ever get to that point of the character. And so then, by the time you get to the end and he is on the good guy's side, basically, but nobody recognizes that. And there's just a lot of stuff in the ending of the show that feels like everybody's basically fighting on the same side, but just nobody's cares. Like, it's just very strange. Which then leads us to Zex Marquis, also known as Miliardo Peacecraft, who is one of the most Char clones in the world of Char clones in AU Gundam, because they really do, and I had forgotten it was as severe as it is, they would just 100% take the major beats of Char's character arc, going from Mobile Suit Gundam to Zeta to Char's counterattack, and then just give all that material to Zex in this 149 episode TV show.
And some of it works pretty well, and some of it is awful.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, you can trace the arc of the show by that, too. Because I think in the first half, Zex is one of the more compelling characters. I said this to you, Sean, off the air. Even if Zex is only 10% the character Char is, and it's a lot lower than that, but, whatever percentage you want to assign to it, Char is still one of the great characters in, like, the history of Western fiction. I meant world fiction.
Yeah.
So that's still enough to be interesting. And, like, it is. He's got a really cool mobile suit. He's got the tall geese.
The tall geese. Oh, I love it.
There's a little bit of mystery around him at first. He's got a great voice that I think... Who's his voice actor?
Takehito Koyasu.
Yeah, who I think does a really good job and is not doing a Shuichi Ikeda impression, which I think is helpful. And, he's got cool pilot moves, and there's good action scenes around him, and, like... There seems to be an inflection point also near or around episode 10 when, like, he takes back the Sank Kingdom and frees it and then says, but I'm not the one to lead it. And he, like, and then in a couple episodes later, he gets rid of the fucking helmet, Yeah. Where I'm like, well, that's really interesting. They moved through, like, basically Char's arc from the original series, but in 10 to 15 episodes. This opens up a lot of possibilities. And they don't really do much with it because then he's very kind of confused for the middle stretch of the show. He's like on a lot of different people's sides. And then off screen, he has this transformation where he becomes this giant villain who's going to do a Char and ram a fucking asteroid into Earth and destroy all life, and we never really know why. And his turn at the end, like where with Char, I completely buy and understand his turn.
Yeah.
Even if it also, I guess that also kind of happens off screen, but I think we saw all the impetus for it in Zeta, so it works for me. there's never a moment of impetus that sparks that transformation in Zex, and it's a big problem for me because it's part of why I dislike the last 10 episodes as much as I do, is Zex as a character he just gets a complete character transplant and makes no sense to me, and yeah, it's bad.
Yeah, and it's honestly, I think part of where it happens for me is way earlier than that. I think all the stuff that he does of taking the remains of Hero's exploded Gundam Wing and rebuilding it and finding Hero and bringing him to the Antarctica so that he can fight fucking Hero in like a one-on-one fight, because like I just have this obsession with the aesthetics of war and I need to bring... It's like, this is nonsense. This is stupid nonsense. And it's like, no human being thinks like this. This is not representative of anything representing a kind of human psychology that is in any way recognizable. And it's so absurd. Like, there's like trying to be an honorable warrior and being that archetype, and then there's like going through the incredible personal cost and multiple episode machinations and potential threat to himself if he gets caught doing this, of rebuilding the fucking Gundam Wing. He like orders 2 different shipments of Gundanium from the fucking colonies so that it's like hidden or whatever, and all the shit he does that ultimately ends up with him being ousted from Oz just so he can have a one-on-one fight with Hiro Yui, a character that, by all rights, Zex should just assume is dead because he was standing on the Gundam that fucking exploded in front of him in a giant explosion. And it's just the huge lengths they go to justify this character doing that is so ridiculous. I just couldn't buy it. It just doesn't, if you think about it for half a second, it doesn't pass any like amount of inspection whatsoever. It's fucking absurd.
You're not wrong. I did like that period I don't know, it's because he's a highly motivated character. Even if those motivations are fucking nonsense at points, it at least is something that contrasts with some of the other characters on the show. But like there is this, like what I thought they were going to do is have him join the Heroes, because he has this big break with Oz where it's like, because part of like his big thing where he's rebuilding the thing for Hero is he's also in that period becoming disillusioned with Oz and wanting to leave. And I kind of thought, even if the motivations are stupid, and I agree with that, this was going to be this precipitating event where he and Hero were going to fight, and then they would wind up kind of teaming up, and that would be a really cool turn for the Char archetype to do that. But they never commit to. This is a big problem with Gundam Wing, is it constantly gets right up to the point of doing something interesting and then doesn't commit.
Yes.
And like Zex and Hero have it the worst, I think, but
every character has it, in different forms. Because that's also where you get another thing that I think is kind of wasted potential if you're trying to do the Char Sayla stuff, is you have an opportunity of, I think, like doing a lot more with the Char Sayla relationship than Tomino Gundam got to do, because the Sayla voice actress wasn't available, so she's not really there in Zeta Gundam, and she has a couple of cameos in Double Zeta. Is you have the potential to have Zex and Relina actually interact with each other, and almost not at all. It is crazy. That basically you have the moment, like they meet once briefly in person while he's still completely zexed up, and she doesn't know who that is. Then Noin reveals to Relina that Zex is actually her long-lost brother, Miliardo Peacecraft, who she doesn't even remember because she was so young at the time. But they don't have any direct interaction in that sequence. It is just Noin telling her that, and I think Relina says something on the intercom, and Zex doesn't tell her anything, and they have no interaction. And then Relina is like out of the show for most of it at that point. And then by the time it comes around that they actually meet each other again is in that last stretch where Zex is inexplicably a villain again. She goes onto the ship. She has like one conversation with him on the White Fang ship. And she has this line of like, am I being held by the blood-stained hands of Zex Marquis? Am I being held in the arms of my kindly brother Miliardo? Or am I being held in the blood-stained hands of the villain Zex Marquis? And she says that, I'm like, you don't know this dude at all. What do you mean kindly brother Miliardo? You have no idea. You've not really ever talked to him. There's no relationship here.
Because the key difference is Sayla and Char knew each other, and they knew they were out there, and they like they had a pre-existing relationship. She doesn't even know she had a brother.
Yes, for all she knows, for her whole life, she was the son of Akio Otsuka, or she was the daughter of Akio Otsuka and some other lady that was there that just also I don't know why Relina's mother just, like, totally disappears from the whole show after her dad dies. It's like, the dad's dead, but the mom can still be a character.
The mom killed herself off screen. The grief was just too much.
It just seems something like that. But for all she knows, she's a Darlian. To the point that she, like, adopts that name again at the end of the series in an Endless Waltz. But, like, yeah, so she has no understanding that there was this whole other potential family she could have had because it was lost to her when she was so young. She has no conception for it. So then trying to do some sort of any relationship between Miliardo and Relina just doesn't work on a very, like, basic level. It just doesn't function in the plot. And it's a huge missed opportunity. And then that's just not even, let's talk a little bit about why doing the Char's counterattack plot with Zex doesn't work, because there's a bunch of reasons. And this is part of the problem with Gundam Wing, is it, in a lot of places, chooses to take a lot of the, like, surface level details of things that older Gundam stuff does, but it copies a lot of the surface level details really exactly, because a lot of the events in the ending of Gundam Wing are, like, really exact duplicates of what happens in Char's counterattack. But there's a lot that isn't, that was behind the scenes or, like, character stuff that sets that up that Gundam Wing doesn't replicate. And so you can't take a bunch of those events and just do them in your show, but without any of the setup that set up those events originally, and think that they're going to have the same impact, which is kind of what Gundam Wing tries to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One of the key things being, I don't think you can really do the Char's counterattack thing without the concept of new types. Because, like, there's kind of a couple pieces to Char's thing. Char's thing in Char's counterattack is not, Earth is mean and they're bad and I want to get rid of them. That's it. No part his thing. His thing is, the Earth as a planet is good and we are ruining it.
Yeah.
And I know people can get better when they move out to space because of the new type theory that my dad invented and all of that, and also all the experiences he's had. And throughout the course of the original in Zeta and all that, the conflict over Earth and everyone fighting over it is what's holding people back from being the best versions of themselves he's seen humanity capable of being. Thus his plan to, I'm going to sacrifice a couple billion people on Earth, but in the long, long, long run, humanity will become better than it ever could. There is no grand philosophical bargain there for Zex other than the Earth keeps attacking space, so we'll just destroy Earth.
Yeah.
Makes no sense. There's no environmental thing. There's no new type thing. There's just this really odd, nonsensical theory that somehow, like, makes no sense. And he's going to ram up the asteroid and destroy Earth. It's fucking stupid.
Yeah. So that's a big one, is the lack of new types and that stuff. Another big one is Char's from fucking space.
Yes,
He's
this is key.
Space Noid.
Yes.
He is the son of Zeon Zoom Daikun, who's the guy who is, like, in Gundam Wing, the equivalent of Zeon Zoom Daikun is the original hero Yui.
Yes.
It's not whatever Peacecraft dude is.
Yeah.
So, like, part of Char's whole thing is he's taking on, and he's, like, using his father's legacy and the legacy of the Zeon name and the Daikun name to further his goals, and it's part of, like, a whole huge part of his identity as a character. Whereas for Miliardo / Zex, it's the exact opposite. He's the, like, forgotten prince of the Sank Kingdom on Earth. He has no connection with or relationship with the colonies at all. So
Yes.
all of a sudden, him being the figurehead for the colonies is such a bizarre turn for the character, because it connects to nothing from his fucking history.
And this is my whole problem. One of my whole problems with the last 10 episodes is everyone has those turns, though. Because he's fighting on a side that he doesn't belong on. Dorothy is suddenly fighting on a side she doesn't belong on. Trey's, it doesn't fully make sense what side he's fighting on. It's all fucking nonsense gibberish.
Yeah. Another big problem with it is the moment that Zex makes his turn, then he announces, like, I am Zex Marquise, I'm the leader of the White Fang, whatever, I'm gonna fuck up Earth, is at the exact moment, dramatically, when Relina, like, sort of announces, like, oh, we've kind of won, and we're going to have true peace now.
Isn't that when she makes the One Nation declaration?
Yes, that is the One Nation, and we are all going to come together as one, and we will throw down our arms, and this is how peace will be achieved, which the show is not, like, we all know that that's stupid. The show is not positioning that as something that's stupid. The show is not positioning this as, like, thank God Zex interrupted that, because that would have worked out terribly. The show's like, oh, we had it, we won, and then Zex has taken our victory from us.
A thought I had a lot in the last half of Gundam Wing is I'm shocked by how much of the plot feels like it was inspired unironically by Superman 4: The Quest for Peace, which is, if you don't know, is the movie where Superman takes all of Earth's nukes unilaterally and throws them into the sun. Mm-hmm. And it feels like someone in the Gundam Wing staff watched that movie and thought unironically that was a good idea of Supes and not kind of a horrible imposition on the people of the world. And they decided to do that. And so Relina taking all of the Earth's weapons and declaring it one nation is a horrible, horrible, dictatorial, authoritarian, bad thing that will not end well.
Yeah.
But it is framed as Superman taking all the nukes and throwing them into the sun.
Yeah.
Which is also literally how Endless Waltz starts, but whatever.
There you go. So yeah, so it is very much like this sense of, okay, Zex has robbed us of our victory, of a true peace that we've attained, or we were on the verge of attaining. And a big part of Char's whole thing and Char's counterattack, of why he does what he does, and what we as the audience see and experience it with him, is the continual deep corruption of the Earth Federation government. You see it time and time again. It's a major theme of every preceding series, building up to Char's counterattack, that is reinforced in Char's counterattack. You know, there's a big scene where Char brings all the Earth Federation leaders into that one boardroom and gives them all fucking briefcases full of gold bars, because he knows how easy they are to buy off, because he's seen it over and over again. And the deep, festering corruption of the Earth Federation government is one of the main things that's driving the cycle of conflict at the heart of the original Mobile Suit Gundam cycle. And that is something that Char struggles with a lot in Zeta Gundam, is trying to figure out how to do that. How do we bring and make the Earth Federation government not these corrupt, easily bought off, cowardly pieces of shit, and people that will actually try to do the right thing. And eventually he gives up on it. And so it's yes, you are going to sacrifice a lot of good people, but probably those people will die anyways because of how horribly destroyed the Earth is being because of our lack of sort of care for environmentalism. And then a lot of the people that are going to die are people that are causing so much death, carnage, and chaos anyways in the cycle, and we just need to get rid of all of it. And in Gundam Wing, it's the exact fucking opposite. We see time and time again how the main Earth government is desperately trying to get to peace. This both before the Relina stuff, when the original Alliance is trying to do the peace stuff, which a hero accidentally fucks up. And then once Relina is doing it, it's the Earth is desperate for some sort of pacifist solution to this problem. And it's Zex and Treize and Oz and the Romefeller Foundation that keep on coming in and fucking it up. And so the idea that then of we're going to destroy all of Earth, why? What is that going to accomplish? You're not getting rid of any corrupt, horrible, fascistic government. You're just killing all the people that are telling you they want peace. This is very confusing.
Extremely confusing. Yes, it's bad. In fact, The other thing is that the constant flip flopping of Zex and his loyalties undermines this. Obviously, Char takes a lot of different sort of allyships in his run. But it's notable that he is always fighting against Earth in one way or another. Because, one, he's in Zeon. Two, he's in the anti-Earth Union group.
Yes.
And then he is Zeon again. He has shifts, but they are not nearly as radical as Zex going literally from one, going from fucking, Germany to America, World War II. Those are the kind of shifts Zex is making.
Yes.
It's totally different for Char.
Yeah, no, you're right. That Char is fighting on the same side. He's just fighting with different groups on that side in the different shows.
Yeah, and with different points of view, but with the fundamental trying to figure out peace for Spacenoids. That's always his, or the advancement of the Spacenoid race. That's always his goal. Yeah. And, Char's a better character.
Yeah, no, Zex is there are moments with Zex that I like. I love the Tall Geese so much. Let's talk a little bit about the Tall Geese. Because it is right here, my Master Grade Tall Geese. Because it is, I think, objectively one of the coolest mobile suits. And particularly, I think, the setup for what the Tall Geese is so cool. And it's some of, I think, what makes Zex's early stuff really work for me, is him trying to master this mobile suit. That's it's the original mobile suit that was designed by the crazy doctors, of which, God, we have to talk about those fuckers too. But the crazy doctors that eventually designed the Gundam. So it's their original, kind of mobile suit design. But the reason why nobody uses the Tall Geese is that it's too good. The Tall Geese is so powerful that it kills whoever is piloting it, because they can't take the incredible G-forces and everything else that the Tall Geese throws at him. And so it's this weird relic that's kind of wasting away in a museum somewhere that Zex in his desperate search for a weapon to counter the Gundams is trying to find, and he gets that. And, you know, like that other dude tries to pilot the Tall Geese that one time, and he's like fucking paralyzed afterwards or some shit. It's this...
He breaks all his ribs.
Yeah, I just love the idea of this mobile suit that is so powerful, but it's designed completely without the safety of the pilot in mind, and Zex trying to sort of desperately figure out how can he master this incredible machine. That is such a cool arc for that character. It's such a cool setup for what the Tall Geese is.
I agree 100%, and it's so sad to see it thrown down the pipe to the point where somewhere in the 30s in the episode count, it gets destroyed. Yeah. It's never mentioned again. Trey's has a version of the Tall Geese that doesn't look as cool, and then Zex does have it again in Endless Waltz, and its Endless Waltz variant I think is the best version of the design. Although it's a pretty minimal. It adds yellow and blue and then the red thing on top, which is cool. But other than that, like, the Tall Geese is like one of those things that starts out with such potential, and especially after the fight in Antarctica, it's just never used that way again.
Yeah.
That's too bad.
It's too bad, but it is a hell of a fucking mobile suit.
I love the Tall Geese. It's great.
Yeah.
All right. Should we circle back to Relina and talk about her turn in the second half and how stupid all the Kanzen Heiwa stuff is?
Yeah, so before we get that, let's talk about just a little bit what is, I feel like, a vision of a much better show with a much better Relina, which is Gundam Wing does have... It's a very weird one for the show, but I love the ending animation.
I love it too. It's one of my favorites. I love it.
It's so good. It's for a totally different TV show. I would much rather watch some show that is about Relina
on a safari.
Yeah, on some weird like National Geographic photo shoot safari in Africa. But it is so good. Her weird like modeling and playing with like the dog and the tiger and shit and riding on the elephant. It is amazing how much personality is in that ending animation.
It's one of my favorite ending animations in all of Gundam, and my favorite moment is at the very end when she like looks at the camera and then she tips her hat.
Yeah,
and it's like
smiles.
This cute. Yeah, that's such a great little animation. I fucking love it. The song is great. It's just love. It's so good. And yes, I want the show where Relina is on safari and it has nothing to do with Gundams.
Yeah, because it's also the Relina that's in the early parts of Gundam, which is like, she's set up as this like, it's a very like Jane Austen kind of character. She's this very spunky young woman that is in this upper crusty kind of society that is sort of, she's being put into this very specific box, both by her parents and then all her fellow students that also put her up on this pedestal as Relina-sama and all this stuff. And then when she sees Hero and gets kind of close to this very different life full of action and adventure, she finds it very seductive and she's very attracted to that life. And that's a great setup for a character. And she's so lively and has so much personality early on in the show. And then especially like culminating in, I think, her greatest moment, which is when she shows up at that one party, finds some friend of her father, and then Lady An shows up, and Relina just pulls this fucking gun, basically saying it's like, yes, this dress looks nice, but I would look even better covered in the blood of Oz, and pulls a gun and tries to shoot Lady An in the head.
So good.
So good. So fucking cool.
I mean, it's legitimately, having seen the whole series, hard to remember how central she is to the first 15 or so episodes where, like, she sees her dad die, and she's in all this action, and she's going between space and Earth, and she really does feel like the protagonist. She has a personality, and she has goals, and she is learning things about herself and her own power.
A giant image of Relina is in the middle of the screen of the eye catch at the middle of every episode of the entirety of Gundam Wing.
Yes.
Like, she feels like this very central, important character for that first stretch, and then she's absent for almost the entire middle section of the show when they're in space. And then when she comes back, she is Relina Peacecraft, and she is just going around saying Kanzen Heiwa Shugi, which is total pacifism, over and over and over again. And she just becomes the most passive, nothing character that has no personality, no life to her. She is not trying to really accomplish anything actively. She's constantly advocating for an absolutely nonsense, unrealistic political position that is not reflective of actual pacifism. Like, it's nothing.
And also making, in the name of that, really dumb decisions that, like, get people killed.
Yes, that ends up destroying the entire Sand Kingdom, and then she immediately afterwards starts, like, advocating mild, like, military resistance, and she both is trying to occupy this very idealistic, ridiculous political position, and I think what makes it worse is that she does end up compromising it in little ways because the show needs her to compromise in ways for the show to function, but not because the show recognizes that the political position is untenable, but because it's like, no, this is a good ideal, but we need to have our action show, so she needs to let us have a Gundam in, like, the basement.
Yeah. It's dumb. If we're making a Game of Thrones comparison again, Relina is like the difference between Tyrion of seasons 1 through 4 and Tyrion of seasons 5 through 8, where he goes from being the vivacious heart of the show to being a dum-dum with no personality.
Yeah, and then also the fact that they never move the hero-Relina relationship forward at any point also hurts her character so much, because she never gets to move past the hero part of the relationship. It's just her saying his name wistfully over and over and over again. And again, like, you can see ways that the hero-Relina relationship could work. They just never push on it in any way. So it just stays basically in the same mode, to the point that they have a whole, like, reprieve of the reprisal of the hero "I'm going to kill you" sequence, where he's like, oh, she became Queen Relina, I'm going to go have to kill you now, I'm going to kill you. There's another way we could do a cliffhanger on the episode again.
Yes. It's dumb.
It's dumb.
Okay. Kanzen Heiwa Shugi.
Yes.
One, I just prefer to translate it as perfect peace, because I think it reflects the silliness of the idea. Even though I know that's probably not the most accurate translation of it. Kanzen is also used as perfect, is my joke. Yeah. You'll hear it talked about with Cell in the Cell games, because that's his Kanzen Tai form. Yeah. But anyway, Sean, does it make sense to advocate complete unilateral disarmament and pacifism in the middle of a global war?
No. And I think something to stress here is that the term they use for it, Kanzen Heiwa Shugi, is a term that, as far as I can tell, looking around the Japanese internet, basically only exists in Gundam Wing. Yeah. Or in video games based on Gundam Wing that also use the term. It's the only place I've seen it come up. The term for pacifism in Japanese is just Heiwa Shugi, which is like peace principles, kind of, I guess you could translate it as. So then adding the Kanzen to make it like complete or perfect...
that's why I like using perfect. It's fucking silly.
Yeah, it's very silly, and it definitely is this, like, really strange view of what pacifism is like this, like, well, if we just all throw our weapons down and kumbaya, my lord, everything will be fine, even while we have the Rockefeller Foundation going around and just killing people indiscriminately and taking over nations through violent force. And one of the weird things about the show is, like, I don't understand why the Rockefeller Foundation takes so long to just go take over the Sun Kingdom. Like, you have multiple scenes of the Duke, who's in control of the Foundation, like, watching Relina do something on some camera, and him being like, the Sun Kingdom people are getting kind of troublesome. We might have to do something about it one day. It's like, why not do something now? They have no army. They have no way of defending themselves. They have nothing. This is like their idea of pacifism is not just I'm going to try not to fight. It's I'm going to run in, like, the path of a bullet naked, is like what Relina's version of it is. It's like you're actively, like, going out trying to expose yourself to danger, like, dramatically unarmed, and you're just, and then, to the show's credit, they do just get taken over. The Sun Kingdom just falls over the course of one episode, and it's kind of nothing. But it's just, they have to prolong it unrealistically for a stupid amount of time.
And it just, I mean, it's I think your point earlier is so right, in that it's not just that it's on its face stupid, it's that the show doesn't explore it. Yeah. It doesn't challenge it. It doesn't question it. It's just like, it's like other characters hear about Kanzen Heiwa Shugi, like Quattro hears about it, and it's like, that's a thing? Oh my god, we're gonna go to the Silent Kingdom and be peaceful now. And it's like, that's not the fucking point, guys. Like no... It has such a fundamental misunderstanding of the purposes and functions of war. Yeah. No one fights a war in the idea that they will fight a war forever. Yeah. People fight wars in the hopes that they will achieve peace, but there are conflicts that spark them, and some are stupid, and some are more understandable, and some are because of actual acts of evil. But, like, there's this whole spectrum that is just unacknowledged. And pacifism as a goal in the setting of like you cannot be the head of a state with a gun pointed at your state's head and throw down your own gun, because what you're sacrificing isn't your principles, it's people. Yes. And that's what's so stupid about it, and makes Relina honestly kind of a war criminal in the back half of the series, up to and including her not resisting becoming queen and tearing down all national borders and just destroying all sovereignty on the planet Earth, which is if you actually think about it, a horrific thing to do.
Yeah, it's something where like Gundam Wing's, again, I think a very fundamental problem with Gundam Wing compared to most other Gundam shows is most Gundam shows recognize that war is a thing that, maybe there's some part of it that is this, humans have this need for violence and conflict. Like maybe you can, roll that in there. But that's not why wars happen. Like wars happen as the result of politics and culture and material needs and desires, right? Like, in the 1 year war in the original Mobile Suit Gundam is motivated by the space colonies fighting for political independence from the Earth Federation, and the Earth Federation is fighting to have both to have control of the colonies, but then also to defend themselves against Zeon after they start dropping colonies on the surface of the Earth. The war with Zeon doesn't happen because a bunch of Zeon people were sitting out in space and being like, you know what? We haven't had a war in a while. Let's go do one of those wars. That sure is fun, huh? Yeah. That's not anything of how the world actually works and how like armed conflict on massive scale happens. Armed conflict on a massive scale doesn't happen for the same reasons that bar fights happen, right? They're totally different things. And Gundam Wing just doesn't, for all its political posturing and its throwing around terms like pacifism, it just has no conception of, well, borders exist for reasons. Cultures and customs and politics exist for reasons. Some of them good, some of them bad. But like just saying when we will just dissolve all national borders and that will fix problems, because as everybody realizes that lines are just things that exist on maps and there's really no differences between people, that means conflict will not happen. It's just ridiculous. It's a ridiculous concept.
It's ridiculous. There's so many things to pick apart here. One thing I would add,
purely childish.
It's so purely childish because this is, and I want to like back up a little bit though, because the idea that war is a part of the human condition is in Tomino's work. Like it is, and it is expounded upon if you read the original Mobile Suit Gundam novel quite a bit. As I always say, that book is the Bible for all future Gundam. It's in there, and the idea is that it is something that like, when there are these political conflicts, this is where I would draw the line between this and Gundam Wing, is that all these conflicts cause wars, but people jump into them because there is this like human, and that is an understandable way to view it. And like his whole theory with the new type stuff is that wars would be different if we had this inherent empathy with one another, because you wouldn't be able to kill someone if you felt what they felt, and so that's all wrapped in there. And it's actually one way where I think Gundam Wing, weirdly not having new type stuff is a drawback, because it keeps bumping into these things that are based on Tomino theories of the world that are built with the new type stuff in mind, but when you take them out, those fall apart, you know? But then like pulling across all national borders, it also means for Queen Relina that she is moving all of Earth under one single sovereign, which would be in fact an ungovernable state and would just lead to more wars, because I mean the United States is too big to fucking effectively govern with one executive. And we're not even the biggest country on Earth. China, the only way they can reasonably do it is with like the fucking authoritarian state they have. And that's awful for a whole host of reasons. Like, you're telling me that in the future you're going to have all colonies and all of Earth, one nation, and there will be a 14-year-old girl in charge. And that will solve everything.
But she's very cute. Have you seen her with that line? It's adorable,
That's now. I think that I think how you can recontextualize the end credits video is it is a propaganda video made by her government to improve her image for all the people.
This is Queen Relina, in on vacation, and she's just like us. She hangs out with animals too.
It's like what Kim Jong Un does.
Exactly.
Really, Relina and Kim Jong Un the same, except one of them isn't dead. I'm kidding. We don't know. That's a little joke to try to date this podcast.
Very topical.
Very topical, yeah. All right. What else do we have to talk about with the Gundam Wing series proper?
Just real quick, I don't know that there's much to say about this other than, what the fuck is with the Gundam scientists? Why are their character designs from a totally different TV show?
I don't know. Are they look like they're supposed to be Frankenstein monsters.
Yeah, like they look like they're like Osamu Tezuka characters.
Yes, that's exactly.
Yeah, they're very different design aesthetic. And other than Dr. J is the only one that, like, he's extreme, but he looks like he kind of exists in the world because he's Heroes guy of Gundam Wing. But the other ones, like my favorite one is, I think it's Duos, is the guy who has like the
big
huge
nose.
Yeah, the huge nose and the big like hair.
Yeah.
The one of the dudes has like a weird like Frankenstein nose. It's so weird. They're very weird characters. They're characters that I had thought died at the midpoint of the show by the time they reappeared at the end, and then I remembered, oh wait, that's right, they just talk about that like they're about to die, and they're like, oh, it looks like we survived one last time, and then they sacrifice themselves in the end, I think.
Do they?
I think so.
Do
right?
they die?
Don't they blow up?
I thought so, but then I also thought they were alive somehow.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
Like they're I really like at that midpoint of the show when all the Doctors come together. I think they're very fun characters.
Yes.
That like after when they come back again at the end, it's just very confusing that they're still
that is like probably in all this space stuff, my favorite section is where Troa is with Oz and with Lady On, and then Hero gets captured. Then slowly all the Gundam pilots get captured and the Doctors are there. That's outside of the first batch of the show, probably the best stretch of Gundam Wing.
It's weird. It turns out sometimes having all of your protagonist characters in the same place makes the show kind of fun to watch. But yeah, so those guys are fun. What is other stuff that we haven't talked about? Like the music. The
music's great. The music's I don't think it's as good as like G Gundam or some of the other shows, but it's very, very good. There's a lot of great themes that like get the blood pumping, and I enjoy hearing.
I mean, there's no Gundam show with bad music, or at least I haven't seen one, and I've seen basically all of them, but like Build Divers. So
right, it's genuinely amazing because you'd think there would be a stinker in there, but no.
Yeah, really not. I mean, the opening. Here's something to talk about. So you do have two openings. You have Just Communication, and then I forget what the other one is called. But it's the same band, and they do the second opening. I have no idea why they introduced it in like the last 9 episodes.
Yeah, the second opening is only for 9 episodes, and it still somehow has 2 animations.
Yeah, it's Rhythm Emotion is the second one because they do start playing Rhythm Emotion at the end of a couple of episodes, building up to when it's the opening, because it's like those episodes that are kind of building up to the Gundam pilots are now getting back into the fight. And so there's a lot of like we're getting our souped up like Death Scythe Hell and stuff like that again, and so Rhythm Emotion plays there. But yeah, it's not even a full core. It's not even 12 episodes. It's 9 episodes.
It's the only explanation would be if they were planning the show to run longer and then cut it off.
But they were not. They weren't. They very much were not.
No.
Yeah. It's weird because Rhythm Emotion's also great. Like 2Mix, the band that does the songs for Gundam Wing, are very good.
The songs that are in the movie are also I love them.
So it's like, I have no problems with Rhythm Emotion. I like it a lot. And when it started playing as an insert song at the end of some of those episodes, I'm like, oh, right, this song kicks ass too.
Yeah.
This song's very good. But it's just, I don't understand, like more Just Communication isn't a bad thing, but it's just very weird because normally how it would be handled for a show of this period, like with Mobile Fighter G Gundam, Turn A Gundam does the same thing. After Gundam X does the same thing, although it doesn't get its full episode run, is at the middle point, it switches to the new opening animation, and that's what it is for the rest of the show. It's like, that's great. It works well.
They started that on Zeta. All the shows...
Yes, that's true, yeah. So it's like, normally that's what you would do. Eventually, we're going to get to the point with, I think Seed is the first one that does this, where every 12 episodes you switch.
Right.
Because you got to get that money on your anime.
Do they do it for both the opening and ending? Because some shows only do that on the endings.
I think it does it for the openings, and then the ending is every 25. It's something like that. Eventually, it goes to the opening and ending is every 12.
Okay, because like some long-running shows like Dragon Ball Super had it only 2 openings, but every 12 episodes was a new ending, so there's like 10 fucking endings to Super.
No, yeah. So eventually we'll have a lot more opening and ending theme songs to talk about as we go deeper, until we get to, like Iron Blooded Orphans has, I think, 4 or 5 across the whole run of the show.
But, I mean, Just Communication is a phenomenal fucking opening.
Yeah, it's a great banger. Like, it's got that opening little ditty that as it comes in it's iconic for a reason.
Yeah.
It is like, you hear that and you're getting hyped up for Gundam Wing.
The animation is fantastic. It's just a great opening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, thinking of the animation, I do have to give props to the last episode of Gundam Wing, the fight between the Wing Gundam Zero and Gundam Epion. The animation is incredibly good.
It's
for a TV animated episode, a weekly animated episode or series from that period. Like the animation is up and down. I think it's of a pretty good quality for that time on average. But whatever they did, however they budgeted stuff, the fucking fight between the Wing Gundam Zero and Gundam Epion is incredible. There's a first person shot that reminds me a lot of some stuff from Dragon Ball Super Broly as they're like flying through the inside of the big colony or whatever they're in. Like, because I think at that point it had been a while since, particularly that Gundam Wing gave you some good eye candy, because some of the early episodes has a lot of good eye candy, but that last episode, holy fucking shit.
Oh, it's great. And I mean, that last episode overall I actually like a lot. It's got some dumb stuff because the plot is dumb at that point, but like that last fight is great. I think the ending of how they destroy, like the doctors sacrifice themselves, but then there's one piece left, and then Hiro has that big shot he does, and then says mission accomplished. Like, it's like a good 80s movie action sequence, and the kiss-off line, you can't be mad at that.
Yeah, like, honestly, I could imagine if you had the whole middle section of the show totally swapped out with something that was much better at building up to that ending, you could leave the last episode mostly intact, and it would be a great finale if the show had been great. But because the show is kind of average to maybe a little bit under average for a lot of it, that ending, even though the ending episode is very good on its own, there's only so much it can do.
Yeah, I do legitimately love the final scene where Hiro is so Relina has become Vice Foreign Minister Relina Darlian again, or her name again. She was not a Vice Foreign Minister before, and she is getting on the plane, and there's a card on her seat from Hiro, and then she looks out the window, and Hiro is like in a mechanic costume walking away, and she calls out the window, and she tears it in half and says, "Deliver it to me by hand next time." That's a great ending. That like is it would work a lot better if they'd had a more fleshed out relationship over the course of the show, but it's the absolute right note to leave on. I like that a lot.
I'm trying to think, because there is like, what if, you know, she rips the thing in half, and then it explodes and like kills her. And he's like, "I told you I was going to kill you." No,
he says mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah, and walks away from the burning wreckage as like people run in as it starts playing. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, it's because it is. Yeah, I'm with you. I think it is a very good last scene. It's a great way to leave those characters. That like, I think it works really well because it calls back to some of the fun Hiro Relina stuff at the beginning of the show that you had lost in the whole middle section.
I thought you were going to say, Sean, what happens is she tears it up and Hiro starts crying, and she goes out and takes one of the tears and wipes away, and then leans in and says, "I'm going to kill you," and then it cuts to black.
That would also be, you know, there's lots of other good alternate endings.
Yes.
Thinking of that reminds me of the funniest piece of dialogue in the entirety of Gundam Wing, which is in one of the, like, this last couple of episodes. You know, Hiro goes on to Zex's ship to save Relina, and I think it's actually as like Hiro's going to go off and like kind of head to the final battle, and he's having a conversation, a rare conversation with Relina that encompasses more than them just saying each other's names. And he says this line where he said, "You know, I swore to protect you before he leaves," and I just find that line so funny. It's like, I just need the like immediate flash cut to him the multiple times he says, "I'm going to kill you." It's like, yep, you definitely swore that you would protect Relina. You're 100% right. You have not threatened to kill her multiple times to her face.
So, all right. Should we move on to Endless Waltz?
Yeah, let's talk about Endless Waltz. Like, it is good. Like, it's you know, I think the plot of Endless Waltz is mostly pretty thin and feels a little bit rushed.
Sure.
It's a 90-minute movie, but it is some of the best stuff in Gundam Wing, for sure.
It's definitely my favorite piece of Gundam Wing. It's got phenomenal animation, but we'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah.
Because if it were just that, it would still be cool, but I do think it's a little bit more than that. I think it does better with the 5 protagonists than the show generally does, at least in concentrated doses. I think it does better with team dynamics. I'm impressed in how it kind of takes all the surviving characters and gives them a little something to do. I really like some of the cool things the characters get to do. Like, I love Quattra's whole mission to fucking go retrieve the Gundams that they have been sending into the sun, and he has to do all the cool... I always love in any space movie where they have to do the calculations about how much fuel to get here, and then we're going to cause an explosion and get back. That's really cool. You know, and I think key is all the little flashbacks are like just enough to kind of help me re-buy into those characters and remind me about the things I liked about them and give them a little depth and fleshing out that helps me to like them more here than I did in the show itself. You know, I don't think they like fix Relina in any significant way. She has some nice scenes, but like it's definitely second half of the series Relina. But it's fine. And I also will, of all their like taking stuff from old Gundam and repurposing it, I like doing evil Mina Wasabi as the villain of this movie is a creative little idea that they do, and I think it works.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think there's a couple things of like, I like all the dynamics of the weird space stuff that Quattro has to do on his mission. I do think it's very messy that in the first 5 minutes of Endless Waltz, it goes from, and we've sent our Gundams into the sun, to, oh shit, we gotta go get those Gundams that we just shot at the sun, huh? It's like the turnaround of that is so fast that it just kind of feels like it's a little bit of like a plot cul-de-sac they have to make to keep Quattro busy while they have other characters doing stuff.
Well, it's also so that you can have the really cool moment in the third act when the Gundams come and... Yeah.
But it just feels a little bit messy to, like...
Sure.
I feel like you could have probably just had... Oh, the Gundams, we put the Gundams on, like, an asteroid out there or something, and we have to go get them. Like, it ends up spending time doing stuff that it feels like Endless Waltz needs more time to expand on the stuff that it's doing anyways, and having to spend, like, this whole section on that.
To be fair, the smartest version of this movie would be they start by sending the Gundams off into space, and then they realize this perfect pacifism thing is stupid. Maybe we want to keep our super weapons in case something happens.
Mm-hmm.
But
well, that's why I said, like, they probably should have just had them, like, encased in, like, some secret asteroid base somewhere that then they have to go retrieve this. Like, maybe this throwing down our weapons and not having them accessible is actually not going to work in the long run. But yes, I think one of the main things that Endless Waltz does well is giving you just those little tiny snippets of those flashbacks to sell you on the characters. And I think the one that has improved the most is Hero.
Because that flashback scene is legitimately really good.
Yes.
And I think it's moving, and I think it helps contextualize a lot of Hero's behavior, and like having him actually wear that pain in the movie, and I think his final scene of saying I will never kill again and getting closure and destroying his Gundam, like, it makes me feel much more positive about that character than I did at any point in the show.
Yeah, and I think he has that really good moment in the fight with Wu Fei where he says, so how many more people are we going to have to kill Wu Fei? Like, how many times do I have to kill that girl and her dog again? Like, that is a very good moment.
It's a good moment, and I think it's honestly the best use of Wu Fei they could have made at this point, which is making him a counterpoint for some of the other characters, for Hero specifically, and one, getting to do a big cool fight, which is a really good fight, and then having Wu Fei voice this kind of one set of beliefs that helps us see how Hero has grown and what he's living with. Like, you know, I don't know what else you really could do with Wu Fei at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is still... There's just a very funny moment where, because after Hero says that line, Wu Fei has a flashback to when his entire colony exploded and him crying in pain. And he's like, oh, wait, is shit like... Oh, right, bad things happen in War 2.
Yes.
I forgot. I forgot all the trauma I suffered over the course of the last show.
Yes.
Maybe we shouldn't have wars. You've got a point there, Hero. I didn't think about it that hard.
I know.
You fucking idiot.
Yeah. But you know, Duo and Troa get a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
Duo gets captured again, as you would expect.
Yep, Troa goes undercover again, as you'd expect.
Yep. I really love in the third act when they all get their Gundams back and you have Duo, Troa, and Quattro all fighting like non-lethally with their Gundams and just having this cool big team fight, which somehow we never really got in the series.
Yeah,
which is amazing. You know, the moment when Hero gets in the fucking rocket to send out to intercept with the Wing Gundam so he can get it as early as possible, and then the unveiling of the Wing Gundam Zero in Endless Waltz is one of the most majestic fucking pieces of animation I've ever seen.
I mean, it's a thing that, like, Endless Waltz, I think, that segment in the middle where Hero gets the Wing Gundam Zero with the, like, angelic wings from the redesign is probably better than Endless Waltz. And it feels like, I'm almost a bit annoyed because it feels like a waste. It's like, this is such a good image and sequence that, like, Endless Waltz can only do so much with it. With, like, the pieces it has, it does better by those characters than Gundam Wing did, but at the same time, like, really, Hero has very little that he does in the second half of the show, and, like, that Wing Gundam Zero gets very little stuff. Like, it gets a smallish fight scene with Wu Fei, and then it shoots a couple of shots at the bunker, and then it destroys itself. It's like, this is such a good design. I feel like you could do more with this.
Right, but it is only a 90-minute movie. And I would say you're underselling the fight with Wu Fei, where they're like where they're going in atmosphere and all that. I think that's really good. And then the scene where he does fire at the base I still think is a really good scene where it's like it's tearing itself apart as he's firing.
It's good, but it's also like, why is it getting ripped apart? Because it went in from atmosphere. We've seen the Wing Gundam do that multiple times.
I think it's like supposed to be he's like the force of the gun or something. I don't know.
It does, yeah. It's like it
works visually, so I'm okay with it.
Yeah,
but.
Like I think those are good-ish sequences. I think it's like my disappointment is I think the reveal of the Wing Gundam Zero has this sort of majesty and kind of promise to it that then the way they use it in the second half of the movie is like good, but it's not as good as its setup is. Because I think part of the problem with that Wu Fei fight is I think Wu Fei's motivations are better than what he had, but they're still dumb. It's like some dumb Metal Gear Solid bullshit about like, what place are soldiers going to have in this war of peace we've made? It's like, this isn't anything you've ever given a shit about. What are you talking about? Why is this a thing? How is this a thing now with you?
Yeah. But it's, I mean, because there's this weird thing though. There's like that design is so good, you would want it in not a movie but a series. But a series couldn't do that design because it's a
I absolutely don't want it in a series because
Okay.
I think it's too stylized and too extreme for a series to do. I think it's good for a movie, but I think like the movie wasn't good enough to know what to do with that design.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
But I mean, let's talk about the animation. Fucking
It's so
good. God.
It's so good. It's just so good.
It's
Yeah, if
fucking
you
night
want
and
some
day.
Gundam eye candy, Endless Waltz is one of the best things to watch, for sure.
Yeah, I mean it's like I would slot it right below F91.
Yeah.
and maybe on par with like Char's counterattack. Although frankly, like the fluidity of the suit movements in Endless Waltz might even be a rung above Char's counterattack.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Like the number of like fucking frames of animation on every suit movement in this movie is mind-boggling.
Yeah, it is utterly gorgeous. It is an
Yeah.
incredible production. It is like any of like the quibbles I have about story stuff. Like I was hugely entertained watching the thing all the way through because even when some of the story stuff maybe was still a little bit dumb, it sure is fucking good to look at.
And it sounds great. It's like all the best parts of Gundam Wing maxed to 11.
Yes.
And some good parts it never even had on the show. Like I think the direction is just much better. In addition with the animation. So you get all of that. Plus, I think a lot of the stuff you wanted to be better gets elevated at least a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So, like, I really liked it. I'm not going to say it's the best Gundam thing out there or anything like that, but it certainly, I think, is better than the series it came from and redeems it a little bit in my mind of, like, now I can have one solid thing that is like a concrete thing from Gundam Wing I can hang my hat on and say, I really liked this.
Yeah.
So that's what I like about Endless Waltz. But yeah, good God, that animation. I mean, even for a movie-length thing, I mean, it was done as an OVA, and the OVAs generally do look better than the TV series, but like, not to this degree. Like, the closest thing in the OVAs would probably be like episodes 10 and 11 of 8th MS Team. Mm-hmm. But other than that, there's nothing that quite hits those levels that's not a theatrical production, which this was released in theaters in the special edition form. And I would kill to see this on the big screen. That would be so cool.
Yeah, very good, yeah.
Oh, God. It's awesome.
It's very good. One other thing in Endless Waltz that I think is maybe a little bit better than Endless Waltz itself is the line where the title comes from is so
It's
good.
so good, yep.
Yeah, so because you have Marimea Kushranada, the evil Mina Vazabi, as you said.
Yes.
She comes in, is talking to Relina, and she says that history is just an endless waltz of 3 steps of war, of peace, war, and revolution.
Yes.
It's like, oh my God,
That's
that
great.
line, like, I wish that line was something that like Full Frontal said in Gundam Unicorn or something. So it was like in just like one of like the best Gundam things.
Yes.
Because it is like one of the best single lines in a Gundam production.
It sounds like something Tomino would write.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just so good. Oh my God. I love that line. It's amazing. And the fact that it's being delivered by a 10-year-old girl, I think it actually kind of makes it better.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love Evil Mina Vazabi, and it's very funny, and, you know, this is also where... So this is hinted at near the end of the TV series, that Operation Meteor's true purpose was to destroy Earth, but the 5 doctors decided not to do that and told the Gundam pilots to, like, follow their hearts. This movie makes it much more explicit by showing that, and showing that Troa Barton, the person he got his name from's dad, was the guy who came up with all this shit, and then he's the villain in this movie who's, like, controlling Marimea.
Yeah, but, like, one thing that's weird is they kind of retcon something from Gundam Wing, which is that Khans, I think was his name, the guy who was the leader of the White Fang.
Yeah.
In the TV show, they basically say that he is the person who came up with Operation Meteor in the last episode, and then they totally retcon that in the movie. It's like, but we killed that dude, so now what about this Barton guy? How about him instead?
Yes. So, you know, there's some questions like, why does Marimea think this is what Treize would want when he died fighting to protect the Earth? Let's not question that too hard.
Who was her mom, and why? How come Treize was in a relationship with Lady Anna is my main question. Like, how did the fuck this happen? I do love that Marimea has this line where she says, like, where Relina's like, how could you be Treize's daughter? How's it even possible? It's like, it is true. I've even proved it through DNA tests. It's like, put that matter to rest.
Yes. But it's good stuff. And I'm glad it gives us something, I think we would say we are much more positive than negative on to end
Oh,
this
absolutely.
on. Yeah.
Like, I think it's like unfortunate. I think Endless Waltz needs too much of the context of Gundam Wing for people to understand it. Because otherwise, I would just say maybe just watch Endless Waltz. But I'm not sure how. Like you can watch GIFs of Endless Waltz or clips on YouTube and enjoy the production values, but the story content I think would be kind of nonsense if you didn't have the context of the show.
But it's definitely the goods. If you're a Gundam fan, you would like Endless Waltz.
Oh yeah, and even with the bad in Gundam Wing, like Gundam Wing is still a show. I think if you're a Gundam fan, that's worth watching. Yes. If for nothing else, then it really does establish a lot. Like we are going to be referencing things from Gundam Wing a lot from this point on, not in a judgment way, not good bad, but in terms of the ways that future Gundam shows take either ideas directly from Gundam Wing, which you have a couple that do that, but then also ways that Gundam Wing shows how you pivot from or transform elements of old Gundam for an AU Gundam show. Like a lot of later Gundam series take multiple cues from how Gundam Wing did things.
Yeah, it was kind of the canary in the coal mine, I think, is one way to say it. Yeah. So next time, Sean.
Oh, yes.
We're going to be talking about one of the, I would say, more unknown corners of the Gundam universe.
One that has only recently got its release over here, so it's very underwatched in the Western fan base for sure.
After War Gundam X, do you want to give us any kind of preview about it?
I'm really excited to rewatch this one because I remember being pretty fond of it. I think it has its problems. Like, one thing to know about After War Gundam X going in is that it is a Gundam show that got its run cut pretty sharply. So a lot of the second half of the show gets abbreviated a lot. It still gets, it's not like the show just stops without finishing its story. They finish out the story, but it's kind of like the original Mobile Suit Gundam, where they didn't get to tell the full story they wanted, and they had to kind of cut things out and rewrite the ending. So that's something to know going in. I really liked After War Gundam X when I first watched it. I'm excited to rewatch it. I'm particularly excited to meet up again with my main boy from that show, Jamil Neat, who is a man with great sideburns and even better sunglasses.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to it. 39 episodes. We'll be back sometime to talk about that one. And then Turn A Gundam after that. We're on a roll with AU Gundam here. Yep. I'm excited to get started.
And I think it's just very exciting. We've been talking a lot about these wars. Every Gundam show is all about war, 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 war. Well, Jonathan, now we're going to find out what happens after war. It's just war.